In the year 2436, humanity had reached the stars, forging alliances and battling adversaries across the cosmos. Yet, amidst this expansion, the ghosts of the past loomed large. In a hidden laboratory on Titan, Saturn's largest moon, a figure stirred within a chamber of frost and steel. The faint hum of machinery filled the air, echoing through the sterile environment, while monitors flickered to life, displaying cryptic data and alarms. Dr. Mira Voss stood at the forefront of the operation, her gaze fixed on the chamber. Years of research and funding had culminated in this moment. The Super Soldier program, once a relic of a bygone war, was about to be revived. She had fought tirelessly to secure resources, to convince the Council that this was the way forward. Now, her heart raced as she prepared to thaw the soldier. "Initiate thaw sequence," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tremors of anticipation coursing through her. The chamber began to hum louder, a symphony of energy coursing through its walls. Inside, the soldier, known only as Project Aegis, began to awaken. His body, augmented and enhanced beyond human limits, was encased in ice, a frozen testament to the hopes and fears of a desperate age. The process had begun. A series of hissing sounds punctuated the stillness, and the ice that enveloped him began to crack, shards falling away as he was freed from his frozen prison. Dr. Voss stepped back, her breath caught in her throat as the soldier's eyes flickered open. A deep blue, they shone with a mix of confusion and primal awareness, like a wolf roused from slumber. "Status report," he croaked, his voice low and gravelly. It resonated with the weight of a man who had seen too much, a soldier forged in the fires of war. Dr. Voss collected herself. "You're safe, Project Aegis. You've been in cryogenic stasis for over a century. We need you to help us fight against the Zalathian Empire." "Zalathians," he echoed, the name rolling off his tongue like a forgotten nightmare. Memories flooded back, the screams of battle, the scent of burnt metal, the taste of despair. He blinked, adjusting to the artificial light that enveloped him. "They still exist?" "Worse than ever," she replied, urgency creeping into her tone. "They're expanding, and we don't have the resources to contain them. Your enhancements to strength, speed, reflexes, we need that. We need you." As his muscles began to respond, Aegis flexed his arms, testing the limits of his body. He was a creation of humanity's desperation, designed for war, and he could feel the latent power surging within him. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. Dr. Voss activated the monitors, displaying holographic maps of the galaxy. Various sectors glowed red, indicating areas under Zalathian control. "We have intel on a critical supply route they're using to reinforce their fleet. If we strike there, we can disrupt their operations and give Earth time to regroup." "Isolate their command," Aegis suggested, the military strategist within him rising to the surface. "Take out their leadership, and the rest will scatter. It's a classic maneuver." "Exactly. But this isn't just about tactics. It's about survival. You'll be the spearhead of our forces." She paused, studying his expression. "Are you ready for this?" He hesitated, a flicker of doubt shadowing his resolve. What did it mean to be a soldier in a new age? Would he be a relic, or was there still a place for him in this new reality? "What if I fail?" "Failure isn't an option," she replied firmly. "You are humanity's best hope. We believe in you." The weight of her words settled on him like a mantle. He was forged from the ashes of war, tempered by loss and pain. He had been a weapon once, a tool of destruction, but now he felt the tug of purpose. "Then let's get to work." In the days that followed, Aegis underwent a grueling series of tests, both physical and psychological. The scientists needed to ensure that the thawing process hadn't affected his enhancements. Each exercise pushed him to his limits, but he welcomed the pain. It was familiar, grounding him in his identity as a soldier. Dr. Voss remained by his side, providing insights and strategy as they prepared for the impending mission. She was sharp-witted and resourceful, her knowledge of the Zalathian tactics invaluable. Together, they devised a plan that would not only disrupt the enemy's supply line, but also gather intelligence on their capabilities. The day of the mission arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. Aegis stood in the hangar bay, clad in a sleek, advanced combat suit that enhanced his abilities further. It was a far cry from the armor of his time, a testament to humanity's advancements in technology. As he prepared to board the stealth ship, he glanced at Dr. Voss one last time. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aegis offered a reassuring nod. "We've come too far to turn back now. I won't let you down." The ship's engines roared to life, and they launched into the cold expanse of space, hurtling toward the Zalathian territory. As they traversed the void, Aegis felt a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. Each star they passed reminded him of the countless battles he had fought, the lives lost in the name of a cause he could barely remember. "Approaching target zone," the pilot announced, breaking the silence. "Initiating cloaking protocols." The ship shimmered, the stars outside becoming a distorted haze as they entered enemy territory undetected. Aegis felt a rush of adrenaline, the thrill of the hunt coursing through him. He was alive, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. "On my signal," Dr. Voss instructed, her voice steady. "We breach their defenses and secure the supply depot. Stay sharp." As the ship descended toward the supply depot, Aegis's heart raced. He had fought countless battles before, but the stakes had never felt so personal. This was not just about survival, it was about reclaiming humanity's future. With a soft thud, the ship landed silently behind the depot, hidden from prying eyes. Aegis took a deep breath, centering himself. "Let's do this." The hatch opened, and he stepped out, the cool air washing over him like a forgotten memory. A blend of technology and alien architecture surrounded him, a stark reminder of the enemy they faced. As he surveyed the area, his senses heightened, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. "Move out," Dr. Voss ordered, her voice sharp as a blade. They advanced through the shadows, Aegis leading the way with his enhanced agility. The depot was heavily guarded, Zalathian soldiers patrolling with advanced weaponry. Aegis moved like a whisper, weaving between obstacles, every movement a calculated dance of destruction. When they reached the first guard, Aegis struck with precision. A swift motion, a flash of steel, and the guard crumpled to the ground before he could utter a sound. Adrenaline surged as he slipped into the next sector, eliminating another guard with brutal efficiency. "Good work, Aegis," Dr. Voss commended, her voice crackling through the comms. "Keep pushing forward." As they infiltrated deeper into the compound, they gathered crucial data from the terminals, revealing the Zalathian supply routes and troop movements. Aegis's mind raced, calculating the implications of their findings. This could shift the balance of power back to humanity. Suddenly, alarms blared, red lights flashing throughout the depot. The enemy was onto them. "We've been compromised," Dr. Voss shouted. "Fall back to the ship." Aegis gritted his teeth. They couldn't leave empty-handed. "I'll cover you. Get the data and go." "No, we stick together," she insisted, but Aegis could hear the fear in her voice. "Now," he roared, urgency compelling him. "I'll hold them off. Trust me." With a heavy heart, Dr. Voss nodded, her eyes glistening with understanding. "Be safe." As she sprinted back toward the ship, Aegis turned to face the oncoming Zalathian forces. They were advancing in numbers, weapons drawn, their alien faces a mask of menace. He could feel the weight of their collective malice, but he stood his ground, ready to unleash the fury of a soldier long thought dead. The first wave crashed against him like a tidal force. He moved with blinding speed, striking with lethal precision, his body a blur of motion as he dispatched enemies left and right. The clamor of battle enveloped him, the taste of violence igniting his senses. But the Zalathians were relentless. More soldiers poured in, and Aegis could feel the strain of his enhancements as he fought. He was a weapon, yes, but even weapons could break. Just as the tide seemed overwhelming, a burst of gunfire erupted from behind him. Dr. Voss had returned, flanked by a squad of soldiers armed with high-tech rifles. "We're not leaving you," she shouted, determination fueling her every word. The chaotic sounds of battle intensified as Aegis and Dr. Voss fought side by side against the oncoming Zalathian forces. The flickering lights of the depot painted the scene in sharp relief, a brutal ballet of combat, filled with gunfire, the shouts of alien soldiers, and the metallic clang of weapons colliding. Each movement was a dance with destiny, and Aegis felt the familiar rush of adrenaline surge through him, igniting the primal instincts that had been dormant for so long. The Zalathian soldiers, their angular forms and elongated limbs lending them an otherworldly appearance, advanced with synchronized precision. Aegis could see the arrogance in their movements, the belief that they were superior. But he had been bred for this moment, trained to counter their overconfidence with raw determination and cunning. "Covering fire!" Dr. Voss shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos as she positioned herself behind a crate, peering around its edge to take aim. The squad of soldiers she had rallied followed her lead, unleashing a barrage of bullets that ripped through the air like a storm. Aegis took advantage of the distraction, launching himself into the fray. He dashed forward, muscles coiling like a spring before he unleashed a flurry of strikes. His fist connected with alien armor, the force enough to send soldiers staggering. Each punch and kick flowed like water, a choreography of lethal efficiency that showcased the enhancements of his genetic makeup. Yet the Zalathians were not unprepared. Their weapons emitted a high-pitched whine as they fired, bright beams of energy streaking through the air. Aegis felt one graze his shoulder, searing pain flaring up like fire. He gritted his teeth and pressed on, using the pain to fuel his fury. Dr. Voss's squad fell into rhythm with Aegis, flanking him as they moved through the depot. Together, they made an unstoppable force. "We need to secure that terminal," she called, pointing to a sleek console at the center of the room. "It holds the data we need." "On it," Aegis replied, charging toward the terminal. He could feel the weight of responsibility settle on him. They couldn't leave this place without securing the intel. It was their only chance to turn the tide of the war. As he reached the terminal, he ducked behind it, narrowly avoiding a volley of laser fire. "I'll start the upload," Dr. Voss announced, her fingers dancing over the interface. "Hold them off." Aegis nodded, locking eyes with her, and then turned his focus to the advancing Zalathian soldiers. They were converging on his position, their movements smooth and calculated. A surge of energy coursed through him as he prepared for the onslaught. "Come on," he growled, welcoming the fight as he charged forward. He leapt into the fray, his body a blur of motion. He struck with the force of a freight train, sending an alien soldier flying. The others hesitated for just a moment, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. That hesitation was all Aegis needed. He moved like a whirlwind, weaving in and out of enemy fire, taking down one soldier after another. The clang of metal and the thud of bodies hitting the ground created a symphony of destruction. Each strike was fueled by the memories of his past battles, the friends lost, the promises made. A soldier never forgot. 15 seconds, Dr. Voss shouted, her voice strained but resolute. "We need to hold them off." Aegis felt the tide of enemies swell around him, but he refused to back down. He glanced at the console, seeing the progress bar inching forward. They were so close. With renewed vigor, he surged into the fray, utilizing every ounce of his strength to keep the Zalathians at bay. Just as the last few seconds ticked down, a massive figure emerged from the shadows, a Zalathian commander, towering above the others, its armor gleaming ominously. It brandished a weapon that crackled with energy, its eyes narrowing as it assessed Aegis. "Foolish human," the commander spat, its voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can resist the might of the Zalathian Empire?" Aegis gritted his teeth. "I don't just think, I know I can." With a roar, the commander unleashed a burst of energy. Aegis dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast that scorched the ground where he had stood just moments before. He could feel the heat against his skin, an instant reminder of the stakes. Dr. Voss's voice broke through his focus. "The upload is complete. Let's go." "Cover me," Aegis barked, charging toward the commander, knowing he had to eliminate this threat to ensure their escape. He lunged forward, delivering a powerful punch to the commander's side, but the alien merely absorbed the blow, a smirk crossing its face. "You'll have to do better than that," it taunted, swinging its weapon toward Aegis. With quick reflexes, Aegis ducked under the swing, rolling to his feet and countering with a strike to the commander's legs. The creature staggered but quickly regained its balance, glaring at him with newfound fury. "Fool, you think you can challenge a superior being?" the commander bellowed, the air crackling with its rage. Aegis felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. This was more than just a fight. It was a battle for humanity's survival. He couldn't falter now. "I'm not here to challenge you. I'm here to end this." With renewed resolve, Aegis feigned a strike to the left before pivoting and unleashing a devastating kick to the commander's torso. The alien stumbled back, shock flickering in its eyes. Seizing the moment, Aegis followed up with a series of rapid punches, each connecting with precision. The commander roared in fury, swinging its weapon again, but Aegis was faster. He ducked, evading the blast, and delivered a final uppercut that sent the commander crashing to the ground. "Now, let's see what you've got," Aegis taunted, standing over the defeated figure. But before he could relish the moment, an explosion rocked the depot. The walls shook, debris raining down around them. Dr. Voss's voice crackled through the comms. "Aegis, we need to leave now." The urgency snapped him back to reality. He glanced at Dr. Voss, who was waving him over frantically. "Go!" he shouted, sprinting back to her as the Zalathians began to regroup. They raced toward the ship, the sounds of battle echoing behind them. Aegis could feel the ground tremble beneath his feet, the chaos of war closing in. They boarded the ship, and the pilot slammed the hatch shut just as a blast rocked the hull. "Engaging stealth protocols," the pilot shouted, fingers flying over the controls. "Status report," Dr. Voss demanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We've got what we need," the pilot replied, glancing back at Aegis and Dr. Voss. "But we've got company. They're locking on to us." "Hold them off," Aegis barked, moving toward the hatch. "Aegis, no, we need to leave," Dr. Voss protested, but he was already in motion. "Trust me," he shouted back, determination fueling his every step. He had faced death before and emerged stronger. This time would be no different. As the hatch opened, he stepped out into the cold void of space, the Zalathian ships swarming around them. Aegis felt the rush of adrenaline surge through him as he focused on the nearest enemy vessel. He activated his thrusters, launching himself toward the enemy ship with incredible speed. The Zalathian pilots were caught off guard as he barreled toward them, a missile of humanity's last hope. Aegis reached the hull and gripped onto it with his enhanced strength, planting explosives that would cripple their defenses. With a swift motion, he pressed the detonator and propelled himself back, just as the ship erupted in a fiery explosion. "Good work," Dr. Voss shouted through the comms, her voice filled with pride. "Keep going," Aegis urged, moving toward the next ship. He was relentless, a force of nature as he engaged the enemy, using everything he had been trained for. Each explosion sent shockwaves through the air, illuminating the dark void of space with flashes of light. The tide was turning, and Aegis felt the thrill of victory rising within him. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a future. As the chaos raged on, he saw Dr. Voss and the squad safely boarding the ship. "Let's go," she called, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to regroup with the fleet." With one last surge of energy, Aegis rocketed back to the ship just as the hatch began to close. He leapt inside, and the pilot wasted no time, engaging the engines and blasting off into the void. They soared away from the battlefield, the remnants of the Zalathian fleet fading behind them. Aegis collapsed into a seat, panting heavily. They had survived. They had achieved their objective. Dr. Voss turned to him, a look of admiration etched on her face. As the ship sped away from the chaotic remnants of the Zalathian depot, Aegis felt the adrenaline slowly ebb from his system, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. He leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a moment to catch his breath. The cockpit hummed with the sounds of machinery, but the chaos outside was fading into the distance, a victory for humanity, albeit a hard-fought one. Dr. Mira Voss sat across from him, her fingers deftly typing into her tablet, the glow illuminating her focused expression. "We got what we came for," she said, glancing up at him. "The data we retrieved could turn the tide of this conflict." Aegis nodded, though the weight of their battle still pressed heavily on him. "But at what cost?" he muttered, memories of the fallen flashing in his mind. He had taken lives today, aliens who, despite their aggression, were fighting for their own empire. He understood the brutality of war, but the realization always left a bitter taste. Dr. Voss sensed his turmoil. "We did what we had to do. It's a harsh reality, but we're fighting for our survival. They won't hesitate to wipe us out if we don't act first." He met her gaze, the conviction in her eyes sparking something within him. She was right. Their survival hinged on decisive action. But as a soldier, he had been conditioned to protect life, not take it. "What's next?" he asked, forcing his mind to focus on the present. Dr. Voss tapped her tablet, bringing up a holographic map of the galaxy. Key locations flickered with warnings, red markers signifying Zalathian strongholds and yellow ones indicating potential targets. "We need to analyze the data we gathered. If we can pinpoint their supply routes and command centers, we can strike at their heart." Aegis leaned forward, intrigued. "And if we take out their leadership? Disrupt their operations?" "Exactly," she replied, a determined smile creeping onto her lips. "But we'll need more resources. The Council will want to hear our findings, but convincing them to act won't be easy." "Why not?" Aegis asked, a frown forming. "After everything we've just experienced, they should be on board." Dr. Voss's expression darkened. "The Council is hesitant. They've invested heavily in diplomatic solutions, and some members believe that an outright war with the Zalathians would be disastrous. They see you as a last resort, a weapon to be used only if absolutely necessary." "Then we'll have to change their minds," Aegis declared, a fire igniting within him. "Let them see the potential for loss if they don't act." "Agreed," she said, her enthusiasm matching his resolve. "But we'll need to prepare for the possibility that they won't support us. If that happens, we'll have to go rogue." As the ship continued its course toward the nearest Federation outpost, Aegis's mind raced with possibilities. He felt a sense of purpose returning, the warrior within him reawakening. They had achieved a victory today, but the war was far from over. The ship landed at the Federation outpost, a bustling hub of activity surrounded by the vast emptiness of space. Aegis stepped down the ramp, taking in the sights and sounds of the base engineers hurriedly repairing ships, soldiers preparing for missions, scientists poring over data. There was an air of urgency that hung thick in the atmosphere. Dr. Voss strode confidently beside him, her expression resolute. "We need to get to the briefing room," she said, glancing at her tablet. "I've scheduled a meeting with the Council." Aegis followed her through the winding corridors of the outpost, the walls adorned with holo displays of past battles and heroic figures from humanity's history. He felt a sense of weight as they approached the briefing room, the realization that he was now part of that legacy, a soldier reborn for a new era of war. The room was already filled with council members, their faces lined with concern and debate. Aegis stood at the back, observing as Dr. Voss took center stage. She wasted no time, presenting the data they had acquired, outlining the Zalathian supply routes and the vulnerability of their command structure. "We have a unique opportunity to disrupt their operations," Dr. Voss argued passionately. "If we strike at their supply lines, we can weaken them significantly. Aegis is our best asset, he can lead the charge." The council members exchanged wary glances, some skeptical, others intrigued. A tall man with silver hair, Councillor Helmut, leaned forward. "And what makes you so sure this will succeed? We cannot afford another failure. The last campaign cost us dearly." Dr. Voss pressed on, unwavering. "We have the advantage of surprise, and Aegis's enhancements give us a fighting chance. But we need your support resources, ships, personnel. If we hesitate, the Zalathians will only grow stronger." A murmur spread through the room, and Aegis stepped forward, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. "You've seen the consequences of inaction. We barely escaped today with our lives. If we allow the Zalathians to regroup, they will strike again, and next time, we may not be so fortunate." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Aegis could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear of failure, but there was also a flicker of hope. "If we're going to fight, we need to fight smart. We can't afford to play their game anymore," he added, his voice firm. Counselor Helmut frowned, contemplating. "If we do this, and it fails, the blame will fall on all of us." "It's a risk we have to take," Dr. Voss interjected, her voice steady. "The longer we wait, the more lives are at stake. We can't let fear dictate our actions." Finally, Counselor Ree, a younger member with piercing green eyes, spoke up. "I say we proceed. We can't let our fear of failure paralyze us. We owe it to those who've fallen to fight back." The tension in the room shifted, a wave of resolve washing over them. One by one, the council members nodded, murmurs of agreement rising. "Very well," Counselor Helmut finally said, resignation in his tone. "We'll support this mission, but know that the risks are immense. Aegis, you'll have to lead your team carefully." Aegis felt a rush of adrenaline at the council's decision. "We won't let you down," he promised, a renewed sense of purpose igniting within him. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as they prepared for the operation. Aegis trained with the soldiers who would accompany him, honing his skills and pushing them to their limits. He had always thrived in the chaos of battle, but this time he felt a weight of responsibility heavier than before. Dr. Voss remained by his side, coordinating logistics and strategies. Their bond grew stronger through the shared experience of preparing for war. They exchanged ideas, spent late nights analyzing data, and meticulously planning their approach to the Zalathian stronghold. As they reviewed the intel, Aegis found himself increasingly drawn to Dr. Voss. Her passion, intelligence, and unwavering determination resonated with him. She was a beacon of hope in the darkening sky, a reminder that humanity could rise above its fears and confront the unknown. One evening, as they pored over maps of the Zalathian territory, Aegis glanced at her. "You're really committed to this, aren't you?" She looked up, her expression earnest. "We have no choice. This is our fight, and we can't afford to lose. If we don't stand up to them now, we may never get another chance." He nodded, appreciating her conviction. "You know, I never thought I'd be back in this position. It feels different." "Different how?" she asked, intrigued. "More personal, I suppose. The stakes are higher, and I can't just see the enemy as a faceless target anymore." He hesitated, the weight of his past pressing on him. "I've lost so much, and now I have a chance to fight for something greater than myself." Dr. Voss's gaze softened. "You're not alone in this, Aegis. We're all fighting for our future, together." Her words hung in the air, a promise that resonated deeply within him. For the first time since his awakening, Aegis felt a flicker of hope for what lay ahead, not just for himself, but for humanity as a whole. The day of the operation arrived, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Aegis stood at the helm of a sleek assault ship, flanked by a team of skilled soldiers, each one handpicked for their capabilities and resilience. The layout of the Zalathian stronghold loomed in the ship's displays, intricate blueprints outlining the enemy's defenses. "Listen up," Aegis began, his voice steady and authoritative. "This is a high-risk mission, but we've got the element of surprise. Our objective is to disrupt their supply lines and take out their command center. We move fast, hit hard, and get out before they can react. We've trained for this, and I believe in each one of you." Nods of determination filled the cabin, the soldiers' eyes reflecting the gravity of their mission. The assault ship rumbled as it pierced through the atmosphere of the Zalathian stronghold, the descent marked by the shifting hues of the sky above a clash of colors, reflecting the impending storm of conflict. Aegis stood at the front, his heart pounding in rhythm with the ship's engines. He could feel the electric anticipation coursing through the crew, each soldier ready to face the unknown. Dr. Voss stood beside him, her brow furrowed in concentration as she monitored the ship's systems. "We'll be over the target in 3 minutes," she reported, glancing at the display. "Intel suggests heavy defenses, but we have a window before they can fully mobilize." "Good. Keep the comms open. I want to know if we encounter any surprises," Aegis replied, his focus unwavering. He had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to put everything they had trained for into action. As they approached the landing zone, Aegis could see the sprawling complex of the Zalathian stronghold, towering structures bristling with weaponry, their alien architecture both awe-inspiring and menacing. Aegis felt a surge of determination. They were fighting for their very existence, and he would not let his team down. The ship touched down with a shudder, the sound of alarms blaring as the landing ramp deployed. "Go, go, go!" Aegis shouted, leading the charge as they rushed into the fray. The air outside was charged with tension. Aegis took a moment to survey the battlefield, a barren landscape dotted with alien technology and fortified structures. He could see Zalathian soldiers scrambling to respond to their unexpected arrival. But they were still disorganized, their ranks disrupted by the surprise attack. "Covering fire," Aegis yelled, taking point as he dashed toward the nearest barricade. His squad fell into formation, providing suppressive fire to keep the Zalathians at bay. Aegis ducked behind the barricade, peering over the edge to assess their surroundings. He spotted an armored turret that could pose a serious threat. "I'll take that turret down. Cover me." He didn't wait for a response. He sprinted forward, dodging incoming fire. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to weave through the chaos, the world around him slowing as he calculated each movement. He reached the turret, delivering a swift kick that sent it crashing to the ground. With a quick motion, he disabled the controls, ensuring it would no longer fire upon his team. "Turret neutralized," Aegis shouted, adrenaline coursing through him. "Push forward." His squad rallied, advancing behind him as they moved deeper into the stronghold. Aegis could hear the sound of battle behind them, the ship providing cover fire, explosions ringing out as the chaos of war enveloped them. They had to reach the command center quickly. Every second counted. As they navigated through the maze of the compound, Aegis felt a familiar thrill, the exhilaration of combat, the rush of adrenaline that fueled his every move. He led the charge, his body a blur of motion as he engaged the Zalathian soldiers who dared to confront him. "Keep your focus," he called out, exchanging blows with a soldier whose elongated limbs made it a formidable opponent. The Zalathian struck with a speed that caught Aegis off guard, but he quickly adapted, countering with a powerful strike that sent the alien staggering. Just as he was about to follow up with another attack, a blast of energy shot past him, narrowly missing his shoulder. He turned to see a group of Zalathians regrouping, their weapons aimed directly at him. "Grenade!" one of his squad members shouted, tossing a device that landed among the Zalathians. Aegis took cover, the explosion sending debris flying and the enemy scattering. "Push! Now!" Aegis urged, moving forward as the smoke began to clear. They had to keep the momentum going. Hesitation could cost them everything. They reached a corridor leading to the command center, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Aegis could feel the tension in the air, a palpable sense of impending danger. He motioned for his team to halt as they approached the doors, their weapons at the ready. "Prepare for anything," he whispered, heart pounding as he glanced at Dr. Voss. She nodded, her expression steely with determination. Aegis counted down silently, then nodded to the soldiers beside him. "Breaching on 3, 1, 2, 3. The doors exploded open, and they stormed into the command center, weapons raised. The room was filled with holographic displays and Zalathian officers, their surprise quickly turning to anger as they scrambled to defend their position. "Clear the room," Aegis shouted, leading the charge. The room erupted into chaos as gunfire erupted, the air thick with the acrid smell of ozone and burnt metal. Aegis moved with lethal precision, striking down one officer after another. The holographic screens flickered, displaying chaotic images of their stronghold under attack, but Aegis focused solely on the fight before him. "Dr. Voss, access the main console," he yelled over the din of battle. "I'm on it," she replied, already rushing toward the central terminal. Aegis could see her fingers flying over the controls, the interface responding to her commands. As Aegis fought, he could feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. They needed this intel. This could turn the tide of the entire war. He couldn't afford to fail. Suddenly, a massive figure emerged from the chaos, a Zalathian commander, towering and armored, its eyes blazing with fury. It raised a weapon that crackled with energy, aiming straight at Aegis. "Foolish human," the commander bellowed, its voice a deep, resonant growl. "You will pay for your insolence." Aegis felt a rush of adrenaline as he faced the commander. He had encountered Zalathian leaders before, but this one radiated an aura of menace. "I'm not here to pay, I'm here to win," he retorted, lunging forward. The commander fired, and Aegis ducked just in time, the energy beam searing the air above him. He charged forward, using every ounce of his training to close the distance. He feinted left, then pivoted to deliver a devastating kick to the commander's knee. The alien staggered, but quickly regained its balance, swinging its weapon again. Aegis barely managed to evade the blast, rolling to the side and scrambling back to his feet. "Dr. Voss," he shouted, "how long until you access the data?" "Almost there," she replied, her voice strained as she worked furiously. Aegis gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening. He couldn't allow this commander to distract them. He launched himself at the alien, determination fueling his every movement. They exchanged blows, Aegis's speed pitted against the commander's strength. The room was filled with the sounds of combat gunfire, explosions, and the grunts of exertion. Aegis felt the adrenaline surge, every strike and parry amplifying his focus. With one final surge of strength, Aegis delivered a powerful uppercut that connected with the commander's jaw, sending it staggering back. The commander roared in anger, firing wildly as it lost its footing. "Data is uploading," Dr. Voss shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to hold this position." Aegis saw the commander recover, rage blazing in its eyes. "You will not escape," it thundered, charging at Aegis with renewed ferocity. Aegis braced himself, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He sidestepped at the last moment, using the commander's momentum against it. With a swift motion, he struck at the creature's midsection, sending it crashing into a control panel. "Finish this," Dr. Voss urged, her eyes locked on the terminal. Aegis knew what he had to do. With determination, he sprinted toward the downed commander, delivering a decisive blow that incapacitated it. The alien slumped to the ground, and Aegis took a breath, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. "Is it done?" he asked, turning to Dr. Voss. "Just about," she confirmed, her fingers flying over the console. "We'll have access to their entire command structure once the upload completes." Suddenly, alarms blared, red lights flashing throughout the room. "We're out of time," Dr. Voss exclaimed, urgency in her voice. "We need to get out of here." "Grab what you can," Aegis ordered, scanning the room for anything useful. He rushed to the terminal, his mind racing. "I'll cover you." Dr. Voss nodded, focusing on the upload as Aegis stood guard, ready for any incoming threats. The door to the command center began to rumble, the sound of Zalathian reinforcements echoing from the hallways. "Time to move," Aegis shouted, his heart pounding. "We have to go now." Dr. Voss finished the upload just as the doors burst open. A wave of Zalathian soldiers poured in, weapons raised and ready to fire. Aegis braced himself, adrenaline surging as he prepared to face them. "Fall back," he yelled, waving for his team to regroup. "We can't fight them all." The command center erupted into chaos as Aegis and his team fought their way through the oncoming tide of Zalathian soldiers. Aegis had faced countless foes, but the sheer volume of enemies pressing in on them now was overwhelming. The alarms blared, reverberating through the air, a siren heralding their impending doom if they didn't act quickly. "Fall back to the main exit," Aegis shouted, firing into the advancing ranks. He could see Dr. Voss still at the terminal, her fingers flying over the console as she finished securing the data they had fought so hard to obtain. "Almost done," she shouted, her voice strained. "Just a few more seconds." "Make it quick," Aegis yelled, firing off another burst of energy at a soldier attempting to flank them. He felt the heat of their lasers close to his skin, the danger only fueling his resolve. His team fell back to a defensible position behind a large console, where they could regroup. "Cover each other. Watch your angles," he ordered, his heart racing as he calculated their next move. The Zalathian forces advanced relentlessly, their blue skin glinting under the lights, weapons raised, and eyes filled with fury. Aegis took a deep breath, the moment crystallizing in his mind. They needed to get out, but they also needed to ensure the mission's success. "Dr. Voss, are you ready?" he called back. "Just about," she replied, sweat beading on her forehead. "I'm almost through the last layers of encryption." Aegis felt a surge of urgency. He knew that the longer they stayed, the greater the risk of being overwhelmed. He turned to his squad, determination etched on their faces. "We need a distraction. Who can create one?" Private Mara, a sharpshooter with a knack for improvisation, stepped forward. "I can set a charge at the secondary exit. It should buy us a few moments." "Do it," Aegis commanded. "Once that goes off, we'll make our move." Mara nodded, darting away from their position as Aegis and the others continued to lay down cover fire. The Zalathians were getting closer, their shouts filling the air as they pressed the attack. "Almost there," Dr. Voss shouted again, her voice rising above the chaos. Aegis caught sight of Mara at the far end of the room, setting the charge. His heart raced as he calculated the timing. "Mara, you've got to hurry." "Just a few more seconds," she called back, her focus unwavering. Suddenly, a heavy blast shook the room. A group of Zalathians had managed to breach their defenses, firing wildly. Aegis felt a rush of heat as energy beams scorched the air around them. He ducked and fired, taking out one of the aggressors, but they were closing in fast. "Mara!" he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Now!" With a final click, Mara activated the charge, sprinting back toward their position. The explosion rocked the command center, sending debris flying, and the Zalathians momentarily disoriented. "Now, move!" Aegis yelled, charging forward as the dust settled. He could see the confusion among the Zalathians, their ranks thrown into disarray. "Go, go, go!" Aegis urged, leading his team toward the primary exit. Dr. Voss joined them, her face flushed with urgency. "I got the data. Let's get out of here." As they raced through the corridor, Aegis could hear the sounds of chaos behind them, the frantic shouts of Zalathian soldiers regrouping, and the hum of energy weapons firing. They had to keep moving. The path to the exit was fraught with danger, but Aegis's instincts guided him. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. A squad of Zalathians stood blocking their path, weapons raised and eyes narrowed. "Here they are," one of the aliens shouted, the grin on its face sinister. "Take cover," Aegis ordered, pushing Dr. Voss and the others behind a nearby barricade as energy beams began to rain down. He felt the impact of the blast vibrating through the structure, debris raining down around them. "Can you create another distraction?" Aegis asked Mara, who was reloading her weapon, her expression fierce. "Already on it," she replied, tossing a flash grenade into the fray. The device erupted with a blinding light and a deafening bang, causing the Zalathians to stagger back, disoriented. "Now!" Aegis shouted, using the moment to dash forward, his team following close behind. They fought their way through, taking advantage of the confusion. Aegis could feel the rush of battle within him, each movement fluid and instinctual. They were gaining ground, but they still needed to reach the ship. "Keep pushing," he yelled, determination propelling him forward. "We can't stop now." They reached a large open area, the exit to the landing bay just ahead. Aegis could see their ship waiting, the engines roaring as they prepared for takeoff. But there was no time to celebrate. A squadron of Zalathian soldiers was closing in fast. "Dr. Voss, go! Get to the ship!" Aegis commanded, firing at the oncoming forces to buy her time. "I'm right behind you," she shouted, sprinting toward the ship. Aegis turned back, unleashing a volley of shots at the Zalathians, trying to keep them at bay. His heart raced as he felt the pressure mounting. They had come too far to fail now. "Covering fire," Mara shouted, her weapon barking as she aimed at the approaching enemies. With one final push, Aegis sprinted toward the ship, joining Dr. Voss as they reached the ramp. "Get us out of here," he yelled at the pilot, who was already initiating the takeoff sequence. "Engaging thrusters," the pilot replied, the ship lurching as it began to ascend. Aegis watched as Zalathian soldiers fired at them, energy beams lighting up the air, but their shots fell short as the ship gained altitude. The world below them shrank, the chaos fading into the distance. "Did we get everything?" Aegis asked Dr. Voss, breathless. "Yes, we have the data, all of it," she confirmed, a triumphant smile breaking across her face. This could change everything. Aegis leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a moment to breathe. They had made it. They had secured vital intel, and they were alive. But as the adrenaline began to fade, exhaustion washed over him. "Report," Aegis said, turning to the rest of the team as they gathered around the cockpit. Mara, panting slightly, nodded. "We sustained minimal casualties, but we lost a few good people back there. I wish we could have saved them." Aegis's heart sank at the reminder of their fallen comrades. "We'll honor them. They didn't sacrifice their lives in vain." "Next step is to get back to the Federation and analyze this data," Dr. Voss said, her expression resolute. "We need to strategize and prepare for our next move." Aegis nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. They had gained a significant advantage, but the war was far from over. They had to be ready for whatever the Zalathians threw at them next. As the ship soared into the void of space, Aegis gazed out at the stars, feeling a sense of purpose swell within him. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity itself, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. The journey back to the Federation outpost was tense, but filled with a sense of accomplishment. The crew worked diligently, poring over the data Dr. Voss had secured, their minds racing with possibilities. Aegis felt a mix of excitement and dread. What would the analysis reveal? What strategies could they implement? Upon their arrival, the atmosphere was electric, soldiers and scientists alike buzzing with anticipation. Aegis stepped down from the ship, the weight of their mission heavy on his shoulders, but buoyed by the thrill of victory. "Gather everyone," he instructed, turning to Dr. Voss. "We need to present our findings to the Council immediately." "Agreed," she said, her eyes alight with determination. "Let's make sure they understand the gravity of what we've uncovered." They quickly assembled a briefing room filled with council members, military leaders, and scientists. Aegis stood at the front, flanked by Dr. Voss, who was preparing to present the data they had gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aegis began, his voice steady, "we have just returned from a successful mission inside the Zalathian stronghold. We secured critical intel on their supply routes and command structures that can turn the tide in our favor." Murmurs spread through the room, eyes wide with interest. Dr. Voss stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "What we found goes beyond mere logistics. This data provides us with insight into their strategy and weaknesses. We have the opportunity to strike at their heart." Councillor Helmut, the silver-haired leader, narrowed his eyes. "And what's the plan? How can we ensure that we capitalize on this?" The holographic display shimmered to life, illuminating the briefing room with a blue glow. Dr. Voss gestured toward the map of the Zalathian Empire, a complex network of supply lines and command centers intricately laid out. "As you can see, we have pinpointed their supply routes, key command locations, and vulnerable points in their defenses. This is our chance to hit them where it hurts." Aegis watched the council members' reactions closely. Some nodded in agreement, their faces betraying a mixture of hope and skepticism. Others, particularly Councillor Veals, appeared unconvinced. His expression was skeptical, the deep lines on his face revealing years of cautious decision-making. "And what makes you think they won't adapt?" Veals asked, his voice steady yet challenging. "The Zalathians are intelligent. If they catch wind of our intentions, they'll reinforce their defenses." "Exactly," Dr. Voss replied, unfazed. "But the very nature of this intel gives us a window of opportunity. If we act quickly and decisively, we can strike before they have a chance to react." Aegis felt the tension in the room, a palpable mix of fear and determination. "The Zalathians have taken countless lives, destroyed homes, and threaten our very existence. We cannot afford to hesitate," he added, his voice rising with fervor. "This is about survival. We owe it to our fallen comrades to fight back." Councillor Helmut leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. "What do you propose, Aegis? A full-scale assault?" "Yes," Aegis replied. "A coordinated strike on their supply lines would disrupt their operations, crippling their ability to wage war. We can utilize the intelligence Dr. Voss has provided to coordinate our forces effectively." "It's a risky maneuver," Veals interjected, crossing his arms. "We might expose our forces to unnecessary casualties. What if we fail?" "If we do nothing, we guarantee our defeat," Aegis shot back. "Sometimes we must take risks to win. I've faced the Zalathians. I know their capabilities and weaknesses. We can do this." The room fell silent as the council members exchanged glances. Aegis could feel the weight of their decision hanging in the air, the tension almost unbearable. Finally, Councillor Helmut broke the silence. "We need a strategy, a clear plan of attack. Dr. Voss, can you provide us with a detailed analysis of their weaknesses?" "Absolutely," she responded, already accessing more data. "I'll outline the targets and potential approaches. If we divide our forces into small, specialized teams, we can strike at multiple points simultaneously, reducing the risk of heavy losses." Aegis nodded, his heart racing with anticipation. "I'll lead one of the teams. I know the Zalathians' tactics. I can adapt our strategy on the fly." "Then it's settled," Helmut said, his voice firm. "We'll move forward with Dr. Voss's plan. We'll need every soldier at our disposal, and we must maintain strict communication." As the council discussed the details of the operation, Aegis felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. They were finally taking the fight to the Zalathians. He glanced at Dr. Voss, whose eyes sparkled with determination. They were on the verge of something monumental. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at the Federation base was electric with anticipation. Soldiers trained rigorously, honing their skills in preparation for the impending assault. Aegis found himself immersed in the planning, poring over maps and strategies with Dr. Voss and other commanders. "Your team will be tasked with hitting their supply depot in Sector 4, Dr. Voss explained during one of their strategy sessions. "It's crucial to disrupt their logistics." "Understood. What's the timeline?" Aegis asked, glancing at the data on the screen. "We're looking to launch within the next 24 hours. The longer we wait, the more time the Zalathians have to fortify their positions," she replied. As they finalized their plans, Aegis felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was a crucial moment not just for them, but for the future of humanity. When the time came, the Federation forces assembled for the mission briefing. Soldiers filled the large hall, the air thick with tension and determination. Aegis stood at the front, flanked by Dr. Voss and Commander Jet, the leader of the aerial support team. "Listen up," Aegis called, his voice echoing through the room. "This is our moment. We're going to hit the Zalathians where it hurts. We've trained for this, and we have the element of surprise on our side." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Aegis felt a surge of pride. These were his comrades, people willing to stand and fight for a cause greater than themselves. "Dr. Voss will outline the plan," Aegis continued, gesturing for her to take the floor. "Thank you, Aegis," she said, stepping forward. "We've identified several key supply depots. Your mission is to strike at Sector 4 and disable their operations. Aegis will lead one squad, and Commander Jet's team will provide air support." As she detailed the specifics, Aegis could see the soldiers' expressions shift from apprehension to determination. They were ready to fight. "Remember, communication is key," Dr. Voss emphasized. "If things go south, we need to know immediately. Stick to your assignments, and above all, watch each other's backs." The tension in the air thickened as the briefing concluded. Aegis felt a knot of anticipation in his stomach. "Let's move out," he commanded, and the soldiers responded with a roar, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The transport ship rumbled beneath them as it flew towards Sector 4. Aegis's squad was a mix of veterans and newcomers, all eager to prove themselves. He took a moment to look around, gauging their readiness. "Stay sharp, everyone," he said, meeting each of their eyes. "We've trained for this. Trust your instincts and follow my lead." The ship shuddered as it began its descent, the landscape below unfolding like a complex tapestry of Zalathian structures and machinery. Aegis could see the supply depot, a sprawling compound surrounded by guard towers and heavy fortifications. "Touchdown in 10 seconds, the pilot called out. Aegis felt a rush of adrenaline as the ship landed with a thud. "Go, go, go," he shouted, leading his squad out of the ship and into the fray. The moment they hit the ground, Aegis dropped to a crouch, scanning the area. The air was thick with tension, and he could hear the distant hum of machinery and the faint sounds of Zalathian soldiers patrolling the perimeter. "Squad formation," he ordered, and they quickly fell into a line. "We move silently until we reach the main entrance. Mara, you're on point." With stealth honed from years of training, they crept forward, utilizing the shadows and the terrain to their advantage. Aegis felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. Every decision he made could mean life or death for his team. As they approached the entrance, Aegis signaled for a halt. He could see 2 Zalathian guards standing at the door, their weapons poised and alert. "Mara, can you take them out quietly?" Aegis whispered. "On it," she replied, nodding. In a fluid motion, she moved like a shadow, slipping behind the guards. Aegis held his breath, every second stretching out as he waited. Then, in a flash, Mara struck, incapacitating both guards before they could raise the alarm. "Clear," she whispered, returning to the group. "Nice work," Aegis said, feeling a rush of pride. "Let's move." They entered the depot, the interior dimly lit and filled with the sounds of machinery. Aegis activated his comms. "Jet, we're inside. What's your status?" "Hovering above the perimeter. Ready to provide support on your command," Commander Jet replied. "Hold for now. We need to assess the situation first," Aegis instructed, leading the team deeper into the facility. They moved cautiously, weapons at the ready. The depot was vast, filled with crates of supplies and vehicles, an intricate web of Zalathian logistics. Aegis could feel the pulse of potential. Every crate they destroyed would cripple the enemy's operations. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath them, and alarms blared throughout the facility. Aegis's heart raced. "They know we're here. We need to act fast." "Where to?" one of the soldiers asked, urgency evident in his voice. "The main supply control room," Aegis directed. "If we can disable their logistics control, we'll disrupt their entire operation." They moved with purpose, but as they approached the control room, a squad of Zalathian soldiers burst into view, weapons drawn. "Get down," Aegis shouted, diving for cover as a hail of energy beams lit up the room. The squad returned fire, but the Zalathians were heavily armored and well prepared. Aegis ducked behind a crate, adrenaline pumping as he scanned for a better position. The air was thick with tension as Aegis and his squad exchanged fire with the Zalathian soldiers. Aegis ducked behind a stack of crates, his heart pounding as energy beams sizzled through the air around him. The Zalathians were advancing, their alien war cries echoing ominously through the control room. "Mara, flank left," "I'll take right," Aegis shouted, signaling his intent to divide their attention. "Got it," she replied, her voice steady amidst the chaos. Aegis quickly repositioned himself, peeking around the corner of the crate just in time to see Mara darting into cover. With a deep breath, he steadied his weapon and fired a precise shot, hitting one of the Zalathians in the shoulder. The alien staggered back, momentarily disoriented, giving Mara the opening she needed. She charged forward, taking out another enemy soldier with a swift strike, her movements graceful and lethal. Aegis admired her bravery. She had transformed from a rookie to a vital asset in mere days. "Push forward," Aegis yelled, rallying the squad. "We can't let them regroup." With renewed determination, Aegis led the charge into the fray. They stormed the control room, firing at the remaining Zalathians. Aegis felt a surge of adrenaline as he charged in, his training kicking into high gear. He dodged energy blasts, returned fire, and expertly maneuvered through the chaos. "Watch your flanks," Aegis shouted, aware that the Zalathians were trying to encircle them. He glanced over his shoulder to see 2 more soldiers rushing in from a side corridor. "Mara, we need backup," he called out, but she was already aware, taking out the first of the 2 new enemies with a well-placed shot. Aegis focused on the remaining soldier, a hulking figure that loomed large against the backdrop of blinking control panels. He aimed and fired, the beam hitting the Zalathian square in the chest. It fell backward with a thud, the room momentarily quiet as the echoes of battle faded. "Clear," Aegis called, surveying the area. "Let's secure the control room." The squad moved in, breathing heavily but exhilarated. Aegis stepped to the control panel, scanning the interfaces and displays. "Dr. Voss, can you access the logistics feeds from here?" "I can try," she replied, already moving to the nearest terminal. Her fingers flew over the console as she worked to establish a connection. Aegis kept watch, his senses heightened. He could still hear the distant sounds of alarm bells and the shouts of Zalathian soldiers regrouping outside. They needed to act quickly. "Got it," Dr. Voss exclaimed after a tense moment. "I'm in. I can access their supply schedules and relay them to our forces." "Excellent," Aegis said, a surge of hope coursing through him. "How long until you can download the critical data?" "I'll need at least 5 minutes to secure the most vital information," she replied, her focus unwavering. "5 minutes?" Aegis echoed, the urgency rising in his chest. "We may not have that long. We need to set up a perimeter." "Mara, you and Terk take positions at the door," Aegis ordered, pointing to 2 exits. "Make sure no one gets in here." "On it," Mara replied, and she and Terk moved to secure the entrances. Aegis paced back to Dr. Voss, peering over her shoulder at the screen. "What else can we do to ensure our safety?" "We can lock down this control room," she said, her fingers dancing over the console. "It'll create barriers, but it will also limit our own movement. We need to be ready for anything." "Do it," Aegis decided. "Every second counts." Dr. Voss activated the lockdown protocol, and heavy blast doors slid into place, sealing them off from the rest of the facility. Aegis could hear the thud of feet outside and the frustrated shouts of Zalathian soldiers. "Let's hope they can't breach this door," Aegis muttered, stepping back to take stock of the situation. "Mara, Terk, any movement out there?" he called. "Nothing yet," Terk replied, scanning the corridor. "But they're bound to come at us." "Stay alert," Aegis said, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. They were deep behind enemy lines, and one misstep could lead to disaster. Time seemed to stretch as they waited. Aegis felt a bead of sweat trickle down his forehead, anxiety gnawing at him. "Dr. Voss, how's that download coming?" "Almost there," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the blast door, jolting Aegis from his thoughts. "They're trying to breach," he shouted, adrenaline surging through him. "Get ready," Mara yelled, raising her weapon to the door, her body tense and poised to fire. The door rattled violently as the Zalathians pushed against it, their war cries growing louder. Aegis glanced at Dr. Voss, who was still focused on the console. "Now," he commanded, raising his weapon. The door buckled under the weight of the assault, and Aegis felt his heart race. They had to hold their ground. "Dr. Voss, how much longer?" he pressed. "Just a few more seconds," she called, her brow furrowed in concentration. Come on," Aegis muttered, feeling the tension build. The Zalathians were relentless, pounding on the door with everything they had. The door splintered, and Aegis prepared to fire. Mara, Terk, aimed for the breach. With a final, resounding crash, the door gave way, and a wave of Zalathian soldiers surged into the room. Aegis fired at the first one, but more were pouring in behind. "Hold the line," he yelled, adrenaline coursing through him. He could see Mara and Terk taking aim, firing with precision. "Dr. Voss, now!" Aegis shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Done," she yelled triumphantly, pulling a data crystal from the console. "I've got what we need." "Let's go," Aegis commanded, covering Dr. Voss as she secured the data. They needed to retreat before they were overwhelmed. Aegis fired at the advancing Zalathians, watching as one fell, then another. "We need to move to the exit," he yelled, pushing toward the doorway. "Now!" Mara and Terk fell in beside them, forming a protective line as they backtracked toward the exit. Aegis felt the weight of their mission on his shoulders. This was for all the lives lost, all the sacrifices made. As they reached the exit, Aegis looked back at the chaos behind them. The Zalathians were regrouping, their snarls and shouts echoing through the hall. "Go, go," he urged, leading the charge out of the control room. They raced down the corridor, the sounds of battle echoing behind them. Aegis could feel the urgency pressing in on him, the need to escape weighing heavily on his mind. They turned a corner and skidded to a halt as they came face to face with more Zalathian soldiers. "Split up," Aegis commanded. "We can't get pinned down." They darted in different directions, the squad breaking apart to evade the enemy. Aegis felt a rush of adrenaline as he sprinted down the hall, the echoes of chaos fading into the background. "Dr. Voss," he called, glancing back to see her a few paces behind him. "Stay close." "I'm right here," she replied, her face set with determination. They dashed through the twisting corridors, their hearts pounding. Aegis could feel the urgency building as they navigated the labyrinth of the facility. They needed to reach the transport ship before the Zalathians overwhelmed them. "Over here," Terk shouted from a side corridor. Aegis gestured for Dr. Voss to follow, leading the way as they veered into Terk's path. "Quickly, this way leads to the hangar," Terk urged, glancing back nervously. As they ran, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Aegis felt the pressure mounting. They had to reach the hangar before the Zalathians could catch up. They burst into the hangar bay, the sight of their transport ship filling Aegis with hope. Move," he shouted, sprinting toward the ship. The pilot was already preparing for takeoff, his hands flying over the controls. "We need to leave now," he yelled. Mara and Terk climbed aboard, weapons raised, ready to defend against any incoming threats. Aegis and Dr. Voss followed closely, breathing heavily as they boarded the ship. "Go, get us out of here," Aegis shouted to the pilot. Engaging thrusters, the pilot replied, and the ship shuddered as it lifted off the ground. Aegis took a deep breath, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away as they ascended. They were almost out, but the danger wasn't over yet. The transport ship rumbled into the atmosphere, the thrum of engines a familiar sound that usually brought Aegis comfort. But as they soared away from the Zalathian compound, a heavy silence settled in the cabin. Aegis glanced around at his team, the faces of his comrades reflecting a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They had escaped, but the battle was far from over. "Status report," Aegis called, turning to the pilot, who was focused on navigating the turbulent skies. "We're clear of the Zalathian defenses, but they're launching pursuit ships," the pilot replied, eyes glued to the control panel. We'll need to engage evasive maneuvers. Understood. Everyone, brace for impact, Aegis ordered, feeling the familiar thrill of impending danger. The ship jolted as the pilot veered sharply, narrowly avoiding a volley of energy blasts from the pursuing Zalathians. The cabin shook, and Aegis felt his heart race. "We need to lose them," he shouted, adrenaline flooding his system. Mara, who was seated beside him, gripped the edge of her seat. "I'll man the weapons," she said, determination in her voice. "Good idea, Terk, help her out," Aegis replied, rushing to the weapons console. He could see the streaks of enemy fire flashing by the ship's viewport. The Zalathians relentless in their pursuit. "Firing retro rockets," the pilot announced, sending the ship careening forward. The sudden jolt threw Aegis against the console, but he quickly regained his footing. "Hold on tight," he yelled as they spiraled through the air, the Zalathians closing in. Mara and Terk worked in tandem, firing back at their pursuers. "Two ships on our tail," Terk shouted, his fingers dancing over the controls. "I'm targeting the lead ship." "Locking on," Mara confirmed, her focus unwavering as she guided the targeting system. "Firing now." The ship shuddered as a bolt of energy shot out, hitting the pursuing vessel. It exploded in a shower of debris, illuminating the darkening sky. "Nice shot," Aegis yelled, feeling a surge of pride for his team. But there was little time to celebrate. Another enemy ship was right behind them, weapons primed to fire. "Evasive maneuvers," the pilot shouted, steering the ship into a steep dive. The cabin shook violently as they plunged through the atmosphere, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy blasts. "Get ready to fire again," Aegis instructed, gripping the edge of the console as the ship dipped and swerved. "On it," Terk called, adjusting the targeting system. Aegis could see the Zalathian ship gaining on them, and he felt a surge of urgency. "Fire," he commanded. Mara let loose another volley, hitting the enemy ship directly. It erupted in flames, the wreckage spiraling out of control. Aegis couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. "Looks like we've shaken them," the pilot announced, his voice filled with relief. "We're gaining altitude and heading toward the rendezvous point." "Good work, everyone," Aegis said, catching his breath as the adrenaline began to ebb. "Let's regroup and assess our losses." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted, the tension dissipating as they began to realize they had made it out alive. Aegis took a moment to collect his thoughts, glancing at Dr. Voss, who was reviewing the data she had secured. "How's the download?" he asked, curious about what critical intelligence they had obtained. "Secured," she replied, her expression serious. "We have access to their supply routes and logistics schedules. This could give us a significant advantage in the upcoming battles." Aegis nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "We need to relay this information to command as soon as we reach the rendezvous." "I'll get it ready for transmission," Dr. Voss assured him, her fingers already working on the console. As they continued their ascent, Aegis allowed himself a moment of respite. They had faced impossible odds and come out on the other side. But in the quiet, a sense of dread settled in his stomach. This was just one battle in a larger war. "Once we get to command, we need to prepare for the next phase," he said, addressing the entire crew. "This information can turn the tide, but we need to act fast. We can't give the Zalathians time to recover." Mara nodded, her face set in determination. "We'll make sure they know what we found. We have to keep pushing them back." "Agreed," Terk added, his expression resolute. "We can't let them regroup or strengthen their position." As they neared the rendezvous point, Aegis's thoughts turned to the lives lost in the fight. The weight of their sacrifices pressed heavily on him. They had been fighting not just for survival, but for each other, for the future of humanity. The transport ship touched down with a thud, the familiar vibrations grounding Aegis in reality. "We're on the ground," the pilot announced, disengaging. Aegis quickly gathered his gear and made his way to the exit. He stepped off the ship, feeling the cool air wash over him. The Federation Command Center was bustling with activity, soldiers and officers moving with purpose. "Gather the intel," Aegis shouted to his team as they followed him. "We need to debrief immediately." They made their way to the Central Operations Room, where commanders were already discussing the next steps in the war effort. Aegis felt a sense of urgency in the air. They all understood what was at stake. As they entered, the head of the command, General Ferris, looked up, his expression serious. "Aegis, good to see you back in one piece. What's your status?" "We secured critical intel from the Zalathians, but we faced heavy resistance on the way out," Aegis reported, glancing at his team. "We lost a few good soldiers in the fight, but we have their supply routes and logistics schedules." "Excellent work," General Ferris said, nodding. "We need that information immediately. Get Dr. Voss set up at the terminal." Aegis gestured for Dr. Voss to step forward. "Let's get this data transmitted," he said. As she began relaying the information, the room buzzed with energy. Aegis could see other commanders gathering around, eager to hear about their mission. "We're looking at a window of opportunity," General Ferris said, glancing at the gathered officers. "If we can coordinate a counteroffensive based on this intel, we may be able to disrupt their supply lines significantly." Aegis felt a flicker of hope, the possibility of turning the tide against the Zalathians. "We need to act fast. We can't give them time to adjust," he urged. General Ferris nodded. "I'll rally our forces. We'll need all hands on deck for this operation. Aegis, I want you leading one of the strike teams. Your experience is invaluable." "Understood, General," Aegis replied, determination flooding his veins. "We'll hit them hard and fast." Once Dr. Voss completed the transmission, she turned to Aegis, her eyes bright with excitement. "We have a chance to make a real difference here. If we execute this plan correctly, we can cripple the Zalathians' logistics for good." "Let's make it happen," Aegis said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They quickly moved to strategize the details of the upcoming counteroffensive. Aegis felt the adrenaline surge again, the thrill of battle mingling with a deep sense of responsibility. They were on the brink of something monumental. As plans took shape, Aegis gathered his team, feeling a sense of camaraderie and resolve. "Listen up, everyone. We've seen what the Zalathians can do, and we've fought hard to come this far. We can't let our efforts go to waste. This is our chance to strike back." His squad nodded, their expressions fierce and focused. Aegis felt the bond between them grow stronger, their shared experiences forging an unbreakable connection. "Let's finalize our strategy," Aegis continued, outlining their approach to the attack. "We'll hit their supply lines at multiple points, creating chaos in their operations. The goal is to keep them off balance and prevent them from regrouping." Dr. Voss chimed in. "I can help coordinate our intel with the other teams. If we all strike simultaneously, we can maximize our impact." "Great idea," Aegis said, appreciating her foresight. "We'll need every edge we can get." As the meeting continued, Aegis felt a surge of determination. They had come through the fire and emerged stronger, and now they were ready to take the fight back to the Zalathians. The next few hours were a blur of preparations and briefings. Aegis's team checked their gear, double-checked their weapons, and made sure they were ready for the fight ahead. The atmosphere was electric, a potent mix of excitement and tension. The dawn light spilled into the command center, casting long shadows across the room as Aegis and his team prepared for the day's mission. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, the weight of their mission hanging over them like a storm cloud ready to burst. Aegis gathered his squad, the faces of his comrades lined with determination and focus. "Today's the day we turn the tide," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We've gathered the intel we need, and now it's time to act. We'll hit their supply lines and disrupt their operations. We know they're vulnerable, and we're going to exploit that weakness." Mara stepped forward, her expression resolute. "What's the plan, Aegis?" Aegis unfolded a holographic map of the area, projecting the Zalathian supply routes that Dr. Voss had uncovered. We'll strike at 3 key locations simultaneously, he explained, pointing to the targets. Each team will be responsible for one route. The idea is to create chaos and confusion. Terk nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. We'll need to coordinate our timing perfectly. If one team gets delayed, it could jeopardize the whole operation. Agreed, Aegis replied. We'll use the comms to keep in touch. Once we hit our targets, we need to move fast and get out before the Zalathians can regroup. We can't underestimate them. Dr. Voss added, I've also set up a relay system to ensure we can track the Zalathians' response in real time. This should help us adjust our tactics on the fly. Good work, Aegis said, appreciating her contributions. Let's move out. We're taking the fight to them. As they suited up and gathered their gear, Aegis felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. This was what he was made for, the thrill of battle, the camaraderie of his team, the chance to make a real difference. The transport shuttled them toward their designated insertion points, the hum of the engines a comforting backdrop to the tension in the cabin. Aegis went over the plan one last time, ensuring everyone was on the same page. We're going in hot, he said. Stay sharp, trust your instincts, and remember your training. We'll be back before you know it. As the shuttle descended, Aegis felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. This was a pivotal moment in their fight against the Zalathians, and failure was not an option. The shuttle touched down in a dense thicket, the sound of the engines cutting out as the doors opened. Aegis led his team out into the cool morning air, the scent of damp earth and foliage filling their lungs. They moved stealthily, staying low as they approached the first supply depot. Aegis raised a hand, signaling for the team to halt. He crouched behind a tree, observing the Zalathian guards patrolling the perimeter. We'll take them out quietly, he whispered, assessing the situation. Mara, Terk, you're with me. Dr. Voss, stay back and keep an eye on the comms. Understood, Dr. Voss replied, her voice steady. Aegis felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as he gestured for Mara and Terk to follow him. They crept closer, moving with practiced stealth. The guards were distracted, chatting among themselves, oblivious to the danger lurking nearby. On my mark, Aegis whispered, raising his weapon. Ready, Terk responded, his eyes locked on the closest guard. 3, 2, 1, now, Aegis commanded, lunging forward. He tackled the first guard to the ground, silencing him before he could make a sound. Terk followed suit, swiftly incapacitating the second guard with a precise strike. Mara moved to secure the perimeter, ensuring no one had noticed the sudden commotion. Aegis glanced around, feeling a rush of exhilaration. They were in, and now it was time to make their move. Let's plant the explosives, he said, pulling out the small devices from his pack. We'll set them for 5 minutes and get out before they detonate. As they worked quickly to place the explosives on the supply crates, Aegis felt a sense of urgency. Time was against them, and every second counted. He finished securing the last device and stepped back, giving Mara and Terk a nod. Let's get to the extraction point, he said, glancing at his watch. They had to move fast. Comms are clear, Dr. Voss reported over the earpiece. You're good to go. Aegis led the way back through the trees, staying low and silent. As they reached the edge of the thicket, he halted and scanned the area. All clear, he announced, stepping out into the open. But just as they began to move, the unmistakable sound of an alarm blared through the air. Aegis's heart dropped as he turned to see Zalathian guards rushing toward their position, alerted by the explosives they had just planted. Go, move, he shouted, adrenaline surging. They sprinted through the trees, dodging the incoming fire as the Zalathians opened fire behind them. Aegis could hear the crackle of energy blast whizzing past, barely missing them. Split up, he commanded, his mind racing. Regroup at the extraction point. The squad scattered, each taking their own path to evade the pursuing guards. Aegis pushed himself harder, weaving through the dense foliage, his breath coming in quick gasps. He could hear the Zalathians shouting behind him, their pursuit relentless. Keep moving. Don't look back, he urged himself, focusing on reaching the extraction point. He could see the clearing ahead, the designated pickup area where the transport would arrive. As he burst into the open, he glanced back, hoping to catch a glimpse of his teammates. The sight of Mara and Terk emerging from the trees gave him a surge of relief. "Over here," Aegis shouted, waving them over. "We need to get out of here." They sprinted toward him, but the sound of engines roaring filled the air. Aegis looked up to see a Zalathian ship descending, its targeting system locking onto their location. "We're not going to make it," Terk yelled, panic rising in his voice. "Just hold on," Aegis shouted, adrenaline pushing him forward. He raised his weapon, aiming for the ship's engines. "We have to take it out." Mara and Terk quickly joined him, taking aim at the descending vessel. "On three," Aegis called, steeling himself for the shot. 1, 2, 3. They fired in unison, their shots hitting the ship's engines with precision. The vessel shuddered and began to spiral, smoke billowing from the damaged engines. "Let's go, now," Aegis yelled, turning to run. They sprinted toward the edge of the clearing just as the ship exploded behind them, the force of the blast sending them sprawling to the ground. Aegis quickly regained his footing, helping Mara and Terk up. "Keep moving," he urged, pushing them forward. They had to reach the extraction point. As they neared the edge of the clearing, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. The Zalathians were still in pursuit, and Aegis could feel the pressure building. "Almost there," he shouted, urging his team to keep pushing. The extraction point was just ahead. They burst into the clearing, the sight of their transport ship a welcome relief. The pilot was already preparing for takeoff, his eyes wide with urgency. "Get in, hurry," he called, waving them aboard. Aegis and his team climbed into the transport, breathless and battered but alive. The pilot wasted no time, engaging the thrusters and lifting off the ground just as the first Zalathian soldiers emerged from the trees, firing at them. "Hang on," the pilot shouted, maneuvering the ship to avoid incoming fire. As they ascended, Aegis took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. They had made it out, but the battle was only just beginning. "Status report," he yelled to Dr. Voss, who was monitoring the situation from her console. "We've got the intel, but we've also got incoming ships," she shouted back, her fingers flying over the controls. "We need to evade before they lock on." "Do whatever you can," Aegis replied, his heart pounding. "We can't afford to lose this data." The pilot swerved the transport, evading enemy fire as they soared higher into the atmosphere. Aegis felt the weight of their mission pressing down on him. They had gathered critical information, but it came at a cost. "We'll need to relay this data to command as soon as we're safe," Aegis said, feeling a surge of determination. "This is our chance to make a real impact." "On it," Dr. Voss confirmed, her expression focused. As they flew away from the chaos below, Aegis couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in danger. The Zalathians wouldn't stop coming. They wouldn't let this defeat go unanswered. "Prepare for potential contact," the pilot warned, his voice steady. "We may not be out of the woods yet." The transport ship soared through the clouds, the chaotic battlefield fading into the distance. Inside, Aegis felt the tension simmering just below the surface. They had survived the first skirmish, but the war was far from over. As they flew toward the command center, he took a moment to gather his thoughts, glancing at the faces of his team. Mara, Terk, and Dr. Voss were all showing signs of fatigue, but their expressions were resolute. They had faced death and emerged stronger, yet Aegis knew they were just beginning to understand the true stakes of this conflict. "Status?" Aegis asked, turning to Dr. Voss, who was busy relaying the data they had secured to command. "Almost finished with a transmission," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos they had just escaped. "Once we reach command, they'll be able to analyze the intel in real time." "Good," Aegis replied. "We need to keep the pressure on the Zalathians. The longer we give them to regroup, the worse it'll be for us." Terk leaned back in his seat, exhaling deeply. Do you think they'll retaliate right away? Absolutely, Aegis said. They'll want to make a statement after losing their supply lines. We have to be ready for whatever comes next. Mara nodded, her gaze determined. We've already proven we can hit them hard. We just need to keep that momentum. As they continued their flight, Aegis's mind raced with strategies and contingencies. The information they had obtained could shift the tide of the war, but it was imperative to use it wisely. The Zalathians would be expecting retaliation, and they needed to be one step ahead. When they finally touched down at the command center, the atmosphere was electric. Officers and soldiers hurried about, their faces a mix of urgency and determination. Aegis felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as they exited the transport, ready to report their findings. General Faris, Aegis called, spotting the commanding officer at a central briefing table. Faris turned, his expression serious as Aegis approached. Aegis, good to see you back, the general said, his voice booming. What's the status of the operation? We successfully struck the supply routes and secured critical intelligence, Aegis reported. Dr. Voss is transmitting the data now, but we need to be prepared. I expect the Zalathians will retaliate soon. Excellent work, Faris said, nodding. We've been monitoring their movements. Our scouts have reported increased activity near their main base. They're gearing up for a counterattack. Then we need to take advantage of that, Aegis suggested. We can use the intel to plan our next strike. If we hit them while they're vulnerable, we can disrupt their entire operation. Forrest stroked his chin, considering Aegis's proposal. You make a valid point, but we need to ensure our forces are ready. We can't afford any mistakes. We'll be ready, Aegis assured him. Just give us the order. Very well, Faris said. I'll assemble a strike team. Aegis, I want you leading the charge. Prepare your squad and be ready to move within the hour. Yes, sir, Aegis replied, feeling a surge of purpose. As he turned to gather his team, he caught a glimpse of Dr. Voss, who had just finished her transmission. She approached him, her expression serious. Aegis, we need to discuss the implications of the intel we retrieved. There's more at stake than just supply routes. What do you mean? Aegis asked, curiosity piqued. Based on the data, the Zalathians are planning something big. They're amassing resources, likely to launch a full-scale offensive against us, she explained, her voice steady. If we don't act fast, we could be facing their entire fleet. Aegis's heart raced at the thought. Then we need to disrupt their plans before they have a chance to execute them. We can't let them get the upper hand. Exactly, Dr. Voss said. We need to act decisively. Aegis quickly gathered his team, briefing them on the situation. They suited up, the familiar weight of their gear grounding him in purpose. He looked around at Mara, Tarek, and Dr. Voss, their faces filled with determination. This is it, he said, his voice firm. We're going in to strike hard and fast. We have a chance to cripple their plans, but we need to work together and stay sharp. Mara nodded, her eyes blazing with resolve. Let's show them what we're made of. As they boarded the transport for the second time that day, Aegis felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. This mission was crucial. They were about to face the Zalathians head-on, and the outcome could determine the course of the war. The transport lifted off, and Aegis went over the plan one last time in his mind. They would be targeting the Zalathian base directly, aiming to take out key assets and disrupt their supply lines further. Every moment counted, and they needed to move with precision. Prepare for descent, the pilot called, breaking Aegis from his thoughts. They were nearing their target, and the tension in the cabin mounted. Aegis could see the Zalathian base coming into view, a sprawling complex surrounded by defensive towers and patrol ships. Stay focused, he reminded his team as they approached. The transport landed in a hidden area just outside the perimeter, and Aegis led the way out. They quickly moved into position, using the terrain for cover as they approached the base. Let's take down their defenses first, Aegis whispered, pointing to a nearby guard tower. Mara, Tarek, you're with me. Dr. Voss, stay back and keep an eye on the intel feeds. We need to know their movements." "Understood," Dr. Voss replied, her voice steady as she activated her equipment. Aegis, Mata, and Terk crept closer to the guard tower, the shadows providing them with the concealment they needed. Aegis raised a hand, signaling for them to halt as they observed the guards patrolling the area. 3 guards, Terk noted, scanning the situation. "We'll need to take them out quietly." "On my mark," Aegis said, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. 3, 2, 1, now." They sprang into action, moving swiftly to subdue the guards before they could raise the alarm. Aegis tackled the first one, using a swift strike to knock him out, while Mara and Terk handled the others with precision. "Clear," Mara whispered, her eyes scanning the area for any additional threats. Aegis stepped forward, moving to the control panel of the guard tower. "Let's disable their communication systems. If we can cut them off from reinforcements, it'll give us the upper hand." As he worked on the console, he felt the adrenaline surge again. They were making progress, and every second counted. With a few deft movements, he disabled the comms, ensuring that the Zalathians would be blind to their movements. "Let's move," Aegis said, leading the way down the path that would take them closer to the heart of the base. As they advanced, Aegis could feel the tension building. They were deep in enemy territory now, and every sound made his heart race. They navigated through the complex, taking down guards and disabling security systems along the way. "Almost there," he said, glancing back at his team. "Just a little further to the main supply hub." Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently. Aegis stumbled, barely managing to keep his footing. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. "Looks like they're responding to our presence," Mara yelled, her eyes wide. "Move, now," Aegis commanded, urging them forward. They couldn't afford to get trapped. As they reached the supply hub, Aegis could see the chaos unfolding around them. Zalathians were rushing to defend their base, and explosions were rocking the area. They needed to act fast. "Set the charges," Aegis ordered, pulling out the explosives. "We'll take this whole place down if we have to." Mara and Terk quickly began planting the charges while Aegis kept an eye on their surroundings. The air was thick with smoke, and the sounds of battle echoed all around them. "Charges set," Terk shouted, stepping back to join Aegis. "We need to get out of here." "Let's go," Aegis yelled, adrenaline pumping as they sprinted back through the complex, the countdown on the charges ticking down in his mind. As they moved, Aegis could hear the distant sounds of explosions, the chaos they had created serving as a smokescreen for their escape. But the Zalathians were regrouping, and Aegis knew they wouldn't have much time. "Keep moving," he shouted, urging his team forward. They burst through a door just as the first charge detonated behind them, sending debris flying and the ground shaking. "Go, go, go," Aegis urged, pushing them toward the extraction point. As they reached the perimeter, Aegis glanced back to see the chaos unfolding behind them. Aegis and his team sprinted toward the extraction point, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The sounds of the explosions behind them echoed in his ears, but he knew they had to focus on getting out. The chaos they had unleashed was their only chance to escape. "Keep moving," he yelled, leading Mara and Terk through the tangled underbrush. They pushed through the thick foliage, ducking low to avoid detection. The landscape was a blur, a mix of greens and browns punctuated by the distant flashes of gunfire. They broke through the tree line and spotted their extraction ship waiting in a clearing. The pilot was already scanning the skies, his expression tense. Aegis felt a surge of hope as they approached, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that they weren't out of danger yet. "Over here!" the pilot shouted, waving them toward the ship. As they neared the transport, Aegis could hear the roar of engines above. A fleet of Zalathian ships was descending, clearly in pursuit of them. "We need to hurry," he yelled, urgency threading through his voice. Mara was the first to board, quickly followed by Terk. Aegis stepped inside and turned to the pilot. "Get us out of here, now." The pilot engaged the engines, the ship vibrating with power. Just as the transport began to lift off, a hail of energy blast rained down around them. Aegis felt a rush of fear as one shot grazed the side of the ship, sending it rocking violently. "Hold on," the pilot shouted, pulling hard on the controls. The transport lurched into the sky, but the Zalathians were relentless. Several enemy ships were hot on their tail, firing at them with precision. Aegis took a deep breath, steadied himself, and prepared for the fight ahead. "Dr. Voss, can you get a lock on their ships?" Aegis called out, his mind racing with strategy. "I'm on it," she replied, fingers flying over the controls. "I can target their engines, but I need a moment to get a clear shot." "Do it," Aegis commanded. He glanced back at Terk and Mara. "We need to buy her time. Get ready to return fire." As the enemy ships closed in, Aegis grabbed a weapon from the ship's arsenal, feeling the familiar weight settle into his hands. He took a position by the side door, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "3 enemy ships closing fast," Dr. Voss shouted, her voice a mix of concentration and urgency. "Focus on the one in the center," Aegis directed. "That'll give us the best chance to disrupt their formation." "Locking on," Dr. Voss called, her eyes darting between the screens. Aegis opened fire, unleashing a barrage of shots at the nearest ship. His aim was steady, and he watched as one of his blasts struck true, damaging the enemy's shields. "Keep the pressure on," he shouted. Mara and Terk joined him, returning fire with precision. The transport shook as the pilot maneuvered, narrowly avoiding enemy blasts while keeping them in the line of fire. "Dr. Voss, do you have a lock yet?" Aegis called out, his heart racing as the enemy ships drew closer. "Almost there, just a few more seconds," she replied, her focus unwavering. The lead enemy ship fired again, the energy blast hitting their transport and causing the ship to shudder violently. Aegis gritted his teeth, bracing himself against the wall. "We can't take many more hits like that." "Hold on," the pilot yelled, twisting the ship in a daring maneuver. "I'm trying to shake them off." "Now, Dr. Voss," Aegis urged, feeling the pressure mounting. They needed to act fast. "Firing," she shouted, her voice filled with determination. The transport jolted as Dr. Voss fired a targeted shot at the lead enemy ship's engines. The blast connected, and the ship erupted into flames, spiraling out of control. Aegis couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph. "Good shot," he yelled, but there was no time to celebrate. The remaining 2 enemy ships were still closing in, relentless in their pursuit. "Get ready for another pass," the pilot warned, his voice steady as he prepared to evade incoming fire. As the enemy ships veered around to flank them, Aegis turned to Terk and Mara. "We need to focus our fire on one ship at a time. If we take them out, we can break their formation." "On it," Terk responded, determination etched across his face. Aegis took a deep breath, adrenaline surging as they prepared for the next wave of combat. The ship shuddered again as another energy blast struck, and Aegis felt the urgency escalate. "Now," Aegis shouted, opening fire on the second enemy ship with all his strength. His shots rang out, each blast hitting the target. Mara and Terk followed suit, their shots landing with deadly accuracy. The enemy ship rocked under the assault, its shields faltering. Aegis pressed harder, channeling every ounce of focus into his aim. Just as he was about to fire again, the ship's engines exploded in a shower of sparks, sending debris flying into the void. "2 down," Mara cheered, but there was no time to relax. The last ship was still on their tail, firing wildly. "Dr. Voss, can you get a lock on that last ship?" Aegis called, his heart racing. "Working on it," she replied, her eyes glued to the screens. "It's evading my targeting system." "Pilot, can you get us closer?" Aegis directed, feeling the urgency surge within him. "Hang on," the pilot replied, banking the transport sharply. As they closed the distance, Aegis felt the familiar thrill of battle. The last enemy ship was desperate, firing wildly as it tried to escape. Aegis focused on the target, breathing steadily as he steadied his aim. "Almost there," Dr. Voss shouted, her fingers racing across the controls. "I just need a few more seconds." The ship shook again as the enemy fired, but Aegis refused to falter. He could feel the weight of the mission on his shoulders, and he was determined to see it through. "Fire when ready," he commanded, his voice strong. "Firing," Dr. Voss shouted, her focus unyielding. The transport shuddered as they unleashed another targeted shot. The blast struck the enemy ship's engines, sending it spiraling out of control. Aegis watched as it collided with the ground below, the explosion lighting up the night sky. "3 down," Terk cheered, a mix of exhilaration and relief washing over him. "Let's get the hell out of here," Aegis yelled, feeling a rush of triumph. They had managed to repel the attack, but they still needed to regroup. The pilot guided the transport back into the clouds, ascending higher to avoid any further threats. Aegis let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, feeling the weight of their victory settle in. "Good job, team," he said, turning to Mara, Terk, and Dr. Voss. "You all fought well today." "Thanks, Aegis," Mara replied, her eyes shining with pride. "We really pulled together." "We've got each other's backs," Terk added, grinning. "That's what makes us a team." As they continued their ascent, Aegis felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had survived another battle, but the war was far from over. The Zalathians would retaliate, and he knew they had to be ready. "Let's get back to command," Aegis said, his voice firm. "We need to debrief and prepare for what comes next." Dr. Voss nodded, her expression serious. "Agreed. We have valuable intel to analyze, and we need to stay ahead of the Zalathians' plans." As they flew back, Aegis couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. They had struck a blow against the Zalathians, but he knew they would come back stronger, and when they did, he would be ready. Upon arriving at the command center, Aegis felt a surge of energy in the air. The atmosphere was charged with urgency as officers and soldiers moved about, coordinating their efforts for the next phase of the battle. "General Faris," Aegis called, spotting the commanding officer at a central briefing table. Faris turned, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Aegis, you're back," he said, his voice booming. "What's the status of your mission?" "We successfully took out several key supply routes and disrupted their defenses," Aegis reported. "But we have reason to believe the Zalathians are planning a full-scale counteroffensive. We need to prepare." "Good work," Faris said, nodding. "We've been monitoring their movements, and you're right. They're amassing forces for a retaliatory strike." Aegis felt a sense of urgency. "We can't let them regroup. We need to hit them hard before they can launch their counterattack." Faris considered Aegis's words, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "You're right. We need to act quickly. I want you to lead a coordinated strike against their main base." The command center was a whirlwind of activity as Aegis briefed his team and gathered support for the upcoming strike against the Zalathian main base. Holographic maps flickered to life, displaying troop movements, supply routes, and tactical points of interest. Aegis felt the weight of the moment press against him, knowing that their next mission could determine the fate of the war. "Listen up, everyone," Aegis called, addressing the assembled soldiers and officers. "We've dealt the Zalathians a significant blow, but they'll be regrouping and retaliating. It's crucial that we capitalize on their moment of weakness. We need to hit their main base hard and disrupt their ability to respond." General Forrest stood beside him, nodding in agreement. "We'll deploy every available resource. This will be a coordinated effort involving ground troops, air support, and intelligence operations. Aegis, you'll lead the ground assault." Aegis felt a rush of adrenaline at the responsibility. "Understood, sir. I'll need detailed intel on their defenses and any weaknesses we can exploit." "Dr. Voss, can you provide that information?" Faris asked, turning to her. "Absolutely," she replied, pulling up data on her tablet. "Based on the intel we retrieved earlier, we've identified several key weaknesses in their perimeter defenses. They've increased patrols but have left certain areas vulnerable. If we strike those points, we can breach their defenses." "Good work," Aegis said, feeling a sense of confidence in their plan. "We'll split into 3 teams, one to handle the ground assault, another for air support, and the last for intelligence extraction. We need to be quick and decisive." Mara stepped forward, her expression fierce. "I want to be on the ground team. We need to hit them hard and fast." "Same here," Tarek added, a fire in his eyes. "I'm ready for whatever comes our way." "All right, you're both with me," Aegis said, nodding. "Dr. Voss, you'll coordinate from the command ship and provide us with real-time updates on their movements." "Understood," Dr. Voss replied, her determination evident. "I'll keep you informed of any changes." With their roles established, Aegis felt a renewed sense of purpose. They would strike at dawn, and he was determined to ensure their success. As night settled over the command center, Aegis gathered his team for a final briefing. They reviewed the plan in detail, going over their roles and the terrain they would be navigating. Tension hung in the air, but it was laced with anticipation. "Remember, communication is key," Aegis emphasized. "We need to stay in constant contact. If anything goes wrong, we regroup and adapt. No heroics." Mara nodded, her jaw set. "We're in this together, Aegis. We'll make it work." "Exactly," Tarek chimed in. "We've already proven we can handle this." As they prepared for bed, Aegis couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. He lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in his mind. The Zalathians would not take their losses lightly. They would come at them with everything they had. Just before dawn, Aegis was jolted awake by the sound of alarms blaring throughout the command center. He jumped to his feet, adrenaline flooding his system. He quickly geared up, joining Mara and Tarek in the main operations room. "What's going on?" Aegis asked, scanning the chaotic scene. "Zalathian forces are mobilizing earlier than expected," Dr. Voss shouted, her eyes wide with urgency. "They're launching a preemptive strike on our position." "Get the defense systems online," Ferris barked, moving swiftly to coordinate the response. Aegis felt his heart race. They had planned to strike first, but now it seemed the Zalathians were forcing their hand. "We need to adapt our strategy," he said, turning to his team. "If they're coming at us, we can use that to our advantage." Mara nodded, determination in her eyes. "We can set up a defensive perimeter, use their attack to buy us time to prepare for our own strike." "Exactly," Aegis agreed. "We can funnel them into a kill zone. Let's move." They sprang into action, coordinating with other soldiers to fortify their defenses. Aegis felt the tension mount as they prepared for the oncoming assault. The ground shook with the distant rumble of Zalathian forces approaching. As they set up their defenses, Aegis's mind raced. He had trained for battles, but this felt different. They were fighting for survival, and the stakes had never been higher. The first waves of Zalathian troops surged forward, their advanced weaponry glinting in the early morning light. Aegis felt the adrenaline kick in as he took position, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hold the line," Aegis shouted, raising his weapon and firing into the approaching forces. The energy blast illuminated the dawn, creating a chaotic dance of light and destruction. Mara and Tarek fell in beside him, their expressions fierce as they returned fire. Aegis could see the determination in their eyes. They were in this together, and they would fight to the last. The Zalathians advanced relentlessly, their numbers overwhelming. Aegis felt a surge of fear, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. They had trained for this, and he would not let his team down. "Dr. Voss, what's the status on the incoming forces?" Aegis called, glancing back at the command center. "They're approaching fast, but we've managed to hold them at bay for now," she replied, her voice steady. "We need to regroup and prepare for a counteroffensive." "Agreed," Aegis said, scanning the battlefield. "We need to hit them hard. Let's move to the east flank and flank them from the side." They regrouped quickly, moving as a unit toward the east. Aegis could feel the tension in the air as they maneuvered through the chaos of the battlefield, the sounds of battle echoing all around them. As they reached their new position, Aegis could see the Zalathians focused on their main defenses, unaware of the threat looming behind them. "Now's our chance," he shouted, adrenaline surging through him. "Let's hit them." They opened fire, catching the Zalathian forces off guard. Aegis felt a rush of satisfaction as they took down several enemy troops, the tide of battle shifting in their favor. "Keep pushing," he yelled, leading the charge as they pressed into the enemy lines. They fought with precision and determination, pushing back against the overwhelming force. But just as victory seemed within reach, the ground beneath them shook again. Aegis glanced around, sensing that something was off. The Zalathians were regrouping, and Aegis knew they needed to act quickly before the tide turned once more. "Fall back," he commanded, urging his team to regroup. "We need to reassess our strategy." As they retreated to a more secure position, Aegis felt the urgency of the moment. They had gained ground, but the Zalathians were relentless. He needed to think fast if they were to capitalize on their initial success. "Dr. Voss, any updates?" Aegis called, breathing heavily as they regrouped. "Zalathian reinforcements are on the way," she replied, urgency in her voice. "We can't hold them off much longer without a solid plan." Aegis felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "We need to distract them while we regroup our forces. Can you set off an EMP in their command center to disrupt their communication?" "I can try," Dr. Voss said, her determination shining through. "But I'll need time to set it up." "Then we'll buy you that time," Aegis said, determination flooding his veins. "Mara, Terk, we need to create a diversion." "Got it," Mara replied, her eyes fierce. "What do you have in mind?" "We'll draw their fire," Aegis explained, formulating a plan. "If we can create enough chaos, Dr. Voss can slip in and set up the EMP. Then we can launch a counteroffensive." "Let's do it," Terk said, a fire in his eyes. "We'll make it work." With their plan set, Aegis felt a surge of confidence. They would not go down without a fight. As they prepared to move, Aegis took a moment to steady his breath, focusing on the task ahead. "Stay sharp," he reminded his team. "We'll need to be quick and decisive. If we're going to pull this off, we have to work together." As they made their way back into the fray, Aegis felt a mixture of fear and determination. The battlefield was a chaotic blur, but they would not falter. They were soldiers, and they would fight for their home. The Zalathians had regrouped, their forces pushing forward with renewed vigor. Aegis and his team took their positions, waiting for the right moment to strike. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burnt metal as Aegis and his team fought valiantly against the advancing Zalathian forces. Energy blasts illuminated the battlefield like a strobe light, and the cacophony of war echoed in their ears. Despite the chaos, Aegis felt a sense of purpose guiding him as they pressed forward, drawing the enemy's attention away from Dr. Voss. "Keep pushing. We're almost there," Aegis yelled, his voice cutting through the din. He could see the Zalathians diverting their focus, their attention fixated on the firestorm created by his team. Mara and Terk fought beside him, unwavering in their resolve. "Just a little further," Mara shouted, firing at a cluster of Zalathian troops. Her aim was sharp, and the energy blast found their marks, taking down enemies with deadly precision. Aegis felt the familiar surge of adrenaline coursing through him. They had trained for this moment, and now it was time to execute their plan. He glanced back at Dr. Voss, who was working feverishly behind the lines, her fingers flying over her equipment as she prepared the EMP device. "Dr. Voss, how's it coming?" Aegis called out, dodging an incoming blast and returning fire. "Almost done, just need a few more minutes," she shouted, her face a mask of concentration. "Keep them distracted." Aegis nodded, determination igniting within him. He turned back to the fight, rallying his team. "We can't let up, keep their focus on us." They pressed into the fray, exploiting every opportunity to dismantle the Zalathian formation. Aegis felt the weight of the battle, Every movement counted, and each decision could be the difference between victory and defeat. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and Aegis stumbled, almost losing his footing. A massive Zalathian war machine emerged from the smoke, towering over the battlefield. Its metallic frame glimmered ominously, and Aegis felt a chill run down his spine. "Get down," he yelled, pulling Mara and Terk behind a makeshift barricade as the war machine unleashed a torrent of fire. Energy blast rained down, tearing through the ground and obliterating everything in their path. "Dr. Voss, we need that EMP now," Aegis shouted, his heart racing. The war machine was advancing, and they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. "I'm almost there," she called back, her voice strained. "Just a few more seconds." "Can we target it?" Terk asked, eyeing the war machine with a mix of fear and determination. "It's heavily armored, but if we can distract it long enough, we might be able to disable its systems," Aegis said, formulating a plan. "We'll need to hit it from different angles." Mara nodded, gripping her weapon tightly. "Let's do this." They regrouped and prepared to launch a coordinated assault against the war machine. Aegis could feel the pressure mounting. They needed to act swiftly and decisively. "On my mark," Aegis commanded, his eyes locked on the massive threat. 3, 2, 1, now! They surged forward, firing at the war machine from all angles. Energy blasts erupted against its armored shell, and Aegis felt a rush of exhilaration as they began to make an impact. The war machine stumbled, momentarily disoriented by their assault. "Keep firing," Aegis yelled, adrenaline surging through him. "Don't let up." As they continued their assault, Dr. Voss's voice broke through the chaos. "I'm ready. Get clear." "Fall back," Aegis shouted, leading his team away from the impending explosion. They took cover behind a nearby barricade just as Dr. Voss activated the EMP device. The air crackled with energy, and a bright pulse radiated outward. The war machine convulsed, its system sputtering as the EMP disrupted its circuits. Aegis watched in awe as the once mighty machine fell to the ground, a lifeless hulk. "Nice work, Voss," Terk cheered. The tension momentarily lifted. "Now let's take advantage of it," Aegis urged, pushing forward again. "We can't let them recover." With renewed vigor, they launched their assault on the disoriented Zalathians. Aegis felt a surge of power as they fought side by side, each member of the team complementing the other's strengths. "Watch your flanks," Mara shouted, firing at an enemy soldier attempting to flank them. Aegis turned just in time to see Terk take down another enemy, his aim true. As they pressed deeper into the enemy lines, Aegis noticed a shift in the Zalathian formations. They were beginning to falter, their cohesion unraveling under the relentless pressure of the assault. "Keep pushing," Aegis shouted, rallying his team. "We're breaking their lines." But just as victory seemed within reach, the ground erupted once more. A massive explosion rocked the battlefield, and Aegis was thrown to the ground, the world spinning around him. "Get up," he heard Mara's voice, frantic and urgent. He blinked, struggling to focus as the dust and debris settled. He could see the chaos unfolding around him, but his heart raced with the fear of losing his team. "Aegis, we need you," Terk called, pulling him back to his feet. Aegis shook his head to clear it, adrenaline flooding his senses once more. "I'm good, let's move," he shouted, his voice steady as he regained his footing. He surveyed the battlefield, his determination igniting once more. "Dr. Voss, what's the situation?" Aegis called, looking toward the command center. "The Zalathians are falling back, but they're regrouping," she shouted back. "We need to capitalize on this moment before they reinforce." "Then let's go," Aegis urged, leading his team back into the fray. They pressed forward, exploiting the gaps in the Zalathian defenses as they pushed deeper into enemy territory. As they fought, Aegis felt the exhilaration of battle coursing through him. They were a well-oiled machine, each member working in harmony. He could feel their resolve. They would not be deterred. "Focus on their command units," Aegis called, directing his team's fire. "If we can disrupt their leadership, we can turn the tide." Mara and Terk nodded, their eyes focused as they targeted the key leaders in the Zalathian ranks. Aegis joined them, unleashing a barrage of energy blast at the command units. One by one, they fell, and the Zalathian forces began to crumble. "Keep it up, we're almost there," Aegis shouted, urging his team on. The adrenaline was intoxicating, and he felt unstoppable. But then, just as they reached the heart of the Zalathian command, a massive energy pulse erupted from behind them. Aegis turned, his heart dropping as he saw reinforcements arriving, more Zalathians, heavily armed and ready to fight. "Fall back, regroup," Aegis yelled, but it was too late. The Zalathians had them surrounded, their numbers overwhelming. Aegis felt a rush of fear and determination as they faced the oncoming wave. "Stay close," he commanded, ready to lead his team in a strategic retreat. They could not afford to be overwhelmed. As they fought back against the reinforcements, Aegis felt the tide turning once more. They were outnumbered, but he refused to let that deter them. He would fight to protect his team, no matter the cost. "Dr. Voss, can you get us a signal for air support?" Aegis shouted, firing at the advancing Zalathians. "I'm trying," she yelled back, her fingers racing over her equipment. "But their communication systems are still scrambled from the EMP." "Then we'll make our own opening," Aegis decided, determination flooding through him. "Terk, Mara, with me. We're going to create a diversion." They charged forward, drawing the attention of the enemy as they fought fiercely. Aegis felt the adrenaline coursing through him, pushing him to his limits as they pressed into the heart of the Zalathian forces. "Cover me," Aegis shouted, sprinting toward a nearby barricade. He could see the air support on the horizon, but they needed to hold on just a little longer. Mara and Terk laid down cover fire, their aim true as Aegis reached the barricade. He turned, his heart racing as he prepared for the final push. "Now!" Aegis shouted, rallying his team as they charged forward once more, their voices echoing through the chaos. "For our home!" With one final surge of strength, they fought back against the tide, determined to break through the Zalathian lines. Aegis could feel the weight of their victory hanging in the balance, but he refused to back down. As the air support finally arrived, the tide of battle began to shift. The Zalathian forces faltered, their cohesion breaking under the relentless pressure. Aegis felt a surge of hope as they pressed the advantage, pushing deeper into enemy territory. "Keep it up, we're almost there," he shouted, his heart racing with determination. The battle raged on, but Aegis could feel the tide shifting in their favor. The arrival of air support had bolstered their ranks, raining down fire on the beleaguered Zalathian forces. Explosions lit up the sky, a dazzling display of destruction that ignited a fierce determination within him. "Push forward, we can't let them regroup," Aegis shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. He rallied Mara and Terk, who were fiercely focused on the enemies before them. "Let's go," Mara replied, determination etched into her features as she fired at an advancing Zalathian squad. Aegis felt a renewed sense of hope as he watched her and Terk work in tandem, seamlessly covering each other's flanks. "Watch the right side," Terk warned, taking out a Zalathian sniper perched in a nearby structure. The blast sent debris flying, and Aegis felt the adrenaline surge through him. They were fighting with everything they had, and it was beginning to pay off. "Dr. Voss, how are we looking on the ground?" Aegis called back, his eyes scanning the battlefield for any sign of weakness. "We're making progress. Their forces are starting to retreat," she replied, her voice laced with urgency. "But we need to keep the pressure on. If they escape, they'll regroup and come back stronger." "Then let's not give them the chance," Aegis replied, leading the charge deeper into enemy territory. They pushed forward, taking out scattered Zalathian units and disrupting their command structure. As they advanced, Aegis felt a surge of pride in his team. They were more than just soldiers, they were a family, bound by their shared struggle. Each victory felt personal, and he would do everything in his power to protect them. Suddenly, an ominous shadow loomed overhead. Aegis looked up just in time to see a massive Zalathian battle cruiser descending from the sky, its cannons primed and ready to fire. "Get down," Aegis yelled, diving behind cover as the cruiser unleashed a torrent of energy blasts. The ground shook with each explosion, and Aegis felt the heat of the blasts even from a distance. "Dr. Voss, what's the status on that cruiser?" Aegis shouted, peering through the smoke and chaos. "It's heavily armored, but its power source is vulnerable," she called back, determination clear in her voice. "If we can disable it, we can shift the battle in our favor." Aegis nodded, formulating a plan. "We need to split up. Mara, Terk, you provide cover while I make a run for the power source. We have to take that thing down." "Are you sure about this?" Terk asked, concern flashing in his eyes. "We don't have a choice," Aegis replied, his resolve unyielding. "If we let it continue firing, we'll lose everything we've fought for." "Then let's do it," Mara said, her expression fierce. "We're with you." Aegis felt a rush of gratitude. "All right, let's move." They sprang into action, Aegis sprinting toward the cruiser, while Mara and Terk provided cover fire. Energy blast whizzed past him, but Aegis focused solely on the task ahead. He could see the cruiser's power source glowing ominously, a pulsing beacon amidst the chaos. As he closed in, the ground erupted once more, and Aegis was thrown off his feet. He tumbled across the ground, pain shooting through his body as he struggled to regain his footing. "Get up, Aegis," he heard Mara's voice, urgent and fierce. He blinked, shaking his head to clear the fog as he pushed himself back up. "On it," he shouted, his voice hoarse. He could see the cruiser looming before him, and he knew he had to act quickly. Ignoring the pain, he pressed forward, charging toward the exposed power source. Just as he reached it, an energy blast struck nearby, sending him sprawling to the ground. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he scrambled to his feet and activated his own weapon. He aimed at the power source, the glow intensifying as he prepared to fire. "Aegis, watch out!" Terk's voice rang out, and Aegis turned just in time to see a group of Zalathian soldiers rushing toward him. "Get down," he yelled, firing at the incoming troops. Energy blasts erupted in a flurry of light, taking down several enemies before they could reach him. He felt a surge of adrenaline as he fought against the overwhelming odds. With a final push, Aegis aimed at the power source and fired. The energy blast struck true, igniting the core and sending shockwaves through the cruiser. The ship convulsed, its systems spiraling into chaos as alarms blared. "Nice shot," Mara cheered, her voice cutting through the noise. "Let's finish this," Aegis shouted, turning back to the battle. The cruiser was beginning to descend, its power failing, but the remaining Zalathian forces were rallying. "Regroup," Aegis commanded, running back toward his team. "We need to consolidate our positions." As they gathered, Aegis could see the Zalathians faltering. The loss of their cruiser had shaken their resolve, and Aegis felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. They had fought hard, and now it was time to finish what they had started. "Let's push them back," he shouted, rallying his team. "We can't give them a chance to regroup." They surged forward, a united front against the faltering Zalathian forces. Aegis felt the adrenaline surge as they charged into the fray, each member of his team fighting with everything they had. The Zalathians were scrambling, their formations breaking apart as they tried to retreat. Aegis seized the opportunity, leading his team to cut them off at the pass. "Keep the pressure on," Aegis yelled, his voice ringing with authority. "We're not letting them escape." As they pushed deeper into enemy territory, Aegis felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. They were so close to victory, but he couldn't let complacency set in. Every soldier mattered, and every decision could be the difference between life and death. Just as they were about to breach the Zalathian command post, a new wave of enemy soldiers surged forward, attempting to hold their ground. Aegis gritted his teeth, determination flooding through him. "We need to break through," he shouted, urging his team onward. "For our families, for our home." They charged forward, pushing through the Zalathian lines with relentless determination. Aegis felt the heat of battle surrounding him, the roar of energy blasts and the cries of soldiers echoing in his ears. As they neared the command post, Aegis felt a surge of hope. Victory was within reach, but they needed to stay focused. He could see the Zalathian commander directing his troops, a look of desperation in his eyes. "Take him down," Aegis yelled, pointing at the commander. "If we can eliminate their leadership, we can break their spirit." Mara and Terk moved in unison, flanking the commander as Aegis led the charge. They fought fiercely, cutting through the remaining enemy troops with precision. "Cover me," Aegis shouted as he charged toward the commander, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he refused to back down. With a final surge of strength, Aegis closed the distance. The Zalathian commander turned just in time to see him, panic flashing in his eyes. Aegis raised his weapon, aiming for the commander's heart. "Your reign of terror ends here," Aegis shouted, pulling the trigger. The energy blast struck true, and the commander fell to the ground, lifeless. Aegis felt a rush of triumph as he turned to face his team. "Push forward, let's end this," he yelled, his voice ringing with authority. With the commander defeated, the remaining Zalathians faltered, their resolve crumbling as they attempted to retreat. Aegis and his team seized the opportunity, pressing forward with relentless determination. As they fought, Aegis could feel the tide turning. They were pushing the Zalathians back, reclaiming their territory and their home. It was a hard-fought victory, but they were not done yet. "Stay focused," Aegis shouted, rallying his team as they pressed deeper into the chaos. They had to finish what they had started. In the distance, Aegis could see the remaining Zalathian forces scrambling to regroup. He could feel the exhilaration coursing through him. They were so close to victory, and he would do everything in his power to protect his team. Just then, Dr. Voss's voice crackled through their comms. "Aegis, we're detecting a massive energy surge from the Zalathian base. They're preparing to launch a final strike." "Are you serious?" Aegis exclaimed, urgency flooding his voice. "We need to stop them." "They're gathering their remaining forces," Dr. Voss warned. "If they succeed, it could be catastrophic." Aegis felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. The atmosphere was charged with tension as Aegis gathered his team for the final push against the Zalathian forces. They had fought valiantly, but the intelligence from Dr. Voss about a massive energy surge at the enemy base had ignited a fierce urgency within him. Failure was not an option. "We need to reach that command center before they can launch whatever they're planning," Aegis said, his voice steady yet filled with resolve. "If they fire that weapon, everything we've done will be in vain." Mara and Terk nodded, their expressions determined. "What's the plan?" Mara asked, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "We'll split into two teams. Mara, Terk, you take the left flank and create a diversion. I'll head straight for the command center," Aegis instructed. "Once I'm inside, I'll disable their launch systems. Just keep the Zalathians occupied long enough for me to do my job." "Got it," Terk replied, checking his weapon. "Just be careful. You know how dangerous it can get." "I always am," Aegis said with a smirk, but the seriousness of the situation weighed heavily on him. He could feel the pressure building as they prepared for the final assault. "Let's move," Aegis commanded, and they set off toward the Zalathian stronghold. The ground trembled beneath their feet as they approached the enemy base. Explosions lit up the horizon, and the air crackled with energy. Aegis felt the adrenaline surging through him, but he kept his focus sharp. They were nearing the heart of the enemy's operations. As they crested a ridge, Aegis spotted the command center, a large, heavily fortified structure surrounded by Zalathian guards. The energy signature emanating from within was intense, and Aegis knew time was running short. "Here's the plan," he whispered to Mara and Terk, pointing toward the command center. "I'll head straight in while you create a distraction. Draw their attention away from me." Mara nodded, determination blazing in her eyes. "We'll give them everything we've got." "Stay safe," Terk added, and Aegis could see the concern etched on his face. It mirrored his own. "Always," Aegis said, sharing a quick nod with his friends before they split up, each heading to their designated roles. Aegis moved stealthily through the underbrush, his heart pounding in his chest. He was hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. He reached the edge of the command center, the heavy doors looming before him. This was it. With a deep breath, Aegis activated his cloaking device, becoming nearly invisible as he slipped past the guards. The inside of the command center was a whirlwind of activity, alarms blaring and screens flickering with data. He could see Zalathian technicians hurriedly typing commands, their faces set with grim determination. Aegis crouched low, watching the screens display countdowns and targeting systems. The energy surge was unmistakable. He had to act quickly. Quietly, he made his way toward the main control panel, where the lead technician was frantically working. Aegis could see the primary launch system glowing ominously, and he knew he had to disable it before it was too late. With a swift movement, Aegis activated his weapon, aiming it at the control panel. "This is for Earth," he muttered, pulling the trigger. The blast hit the panel with a brilliant flash, sending sparks flying. The room erupted into chaos. Alarms blared louder, and the technicians scrambled, but Aegis didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, dismantling equipment and targeting the energy cores that powered the launch systems. "Stop him!" a Zalathian officer shouted, but it was too late. Aegis had already incapacitated several guards, using his enhanced abilities to outmaneuver them effortlessly. With the countdown still ticking down, Aegis frantically worked to disable the energy cores. He could feel the heat radiating from them, and he knew he had only moments before they activated. Come on," he muttered, his hands flying over the controls as he hacked into the systems. He felt the energy pulsing beneath his fingers, and he knew he was running out of time. Outside, he could hear the sounds of battle escalating. Mara and Terk were holding their ground, but the Zalathians were beginning to regroup. Aegis had to hurry. "Almost there," he grunted, his fingers moving faster. The screen flickered, displaying the final countdown. 5, 4, 3. Just as he was about to initiate the shutdown sequence, a heavy hand fell on his shoulder. Aegis whipped around to find himself face to face with the Zalathian officer who had ordered the guards to stop him. "Stop right there, human," the officer snarled, raising his weapon. "You think you can stop us?" Aegis felt a surge of anger and adrenaline. He wouldn't let this be the end. With a swift motion, he drew his sidearm and fired. The energy blast struck the officer squarely, sending him crashing to the ground. 2, 1, Aegis muttered as he returned to the control panel. He pressed the final command just as the alarm blared, signaling an imminent launch. The screens flickered, and Aegis felt a rush of relief as the countdown halted. He had done it, he had disabled the launch systems. "Now to get out of here," he said to himself, already moving toward the exit. But as he turned, he realized the room was filled with more Zalathian guards, all converging on him. "Capture him," one of them shouted. Aegis felt the weight of their numbers pressing in on him, but he couldn't let fear take hold. He had to fight. With a fierce shout, Aegis sprang into action. He fought with all the strength and speed his training had provided, dodging energy blasts and retaliating with precision. He could hear the sounds of battle echoing outside, and he knew he had to escape to rejoin his team. But the guards were relentless. Aegis felt the sting of energy blasts grazing his arm as he fought to fend them off. He had to find an opening. "Get out of the way," he shouted, launching himself toward the nearest exit. He could hear the chaos outside, the sounds of Mara and Terk engaging the enemy. He had to reach them. Finally, he burst through the doors of the command center and into the open air. The sight before him was overwhelming. The battlefield was alive with energy, explosions lighting up the sky. But there was no time to lose. "Aegis," Mara called, her voice cutting through the chaos. He spotted her and Terk, still holding their ground against the advancing Zalathians. "I disabled the launch system," Aegis shouted, rushing toward them. "But we need to hold our position." Terk nodded, his expression fierce. We've got your back." Together, they formed a tight circle, fending off the Zalathian forces that continued to pour in. Aegis felt the adrenaline surging within him, the weight of the battle still pressing down. But now there was a glimmer of hope. They had disrupted the enemy's plans, but they weren't done yet. "Keep fighting," Aegis urged, rallying his team as they pushed back against the enemy. The Zalathians were desperate, their formations breaking as they tried to reclaim their command center. With renewed determination, Aegis and his team pushed forward, cutting through the remaining Zalathian troops. The air was thick with energy blasts and smoke, but they fought with everything they had. "Let's finish this," Aegis shouted, leading the charge into the heart of the remaining Zalathian forces. They fought fiercely, adrenaline fueling their every move. Aegis could see the fear in the eyes of the enemy as they began to falter. The tide had truly turned, and victory was within their grasp. As they pressed deeper, Aegis could hear the sounds of the battle beginning to fade. The Zalathians were retreating, their forces in disarray. It was a sight he had longed for, and he felt a rush of triumph. "Don't let up. We need to drive them back," Aegis commanded, urging his team onward. They were so close, and he wouldn't let this opportunity slip away. Finally, the last of the Zalathian forces began to retreat, their cries echoing through the battlefield. Aegis felt a surge of victory as he watched them scatter, the remnants of their once mighty army crumbling before them. "We did it!" Terk shouted, throwing his weapon into the air in celebration. Mara laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "We actually did it." Aegis felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had fought against impossible odds and emerged victorious. But even in this moment of triumph, he knew they had to remain vigilant. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. "Let's regroup and assess the situation," Aegis said, his voice steady. "We need to ensure there are no remaining threats." As they gathered, Aegis looked around at the remnants of the battlefield. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the destruction. He felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and a lingering sense of responsibility. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in hues of orange and crimson, Aegis felt a surge of emotions washing over him. The remnants of the Zalathian forces were in disarray, their command center crippled. Yet, even in victory, a heaviness settled in his chest. The scars of battle were deep, and the cost of their hard-won triumph was still to be fully understood. "Dr. Voss, what's the situation?" Aegis asked, as the team regrouped near the command center. The air was thick with smoke, and the acrid smell of burnt metal filled his nostrils. "We've suffered casualties, but we managed to capture a few Zalathian officers," Dr. Voss replied, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They might provide valuable intelligence about the larger strategic picture, but we need to act quickly before they get the chance to regroup." Aegis nodded, understanding the urgency. "Let's set up a perimeter and ensure the area is secure. We need to interrogate those officers and find out what else they have planned." The team quickly fell into motion, moving with the precision that had become second nature to them. Aegis felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but underneath it was an unshakable weariness. He had fought hard, and while victory was sweet, he was acutely aware of the sacrifices made. As they established their defenses, Aegis's mind drifted back to his training, the experiments that had turned him into a super soldier. It was a reminder that the path they were on was fraught with moral complexities. He had been designed for war, but he had also gained the ability to choose, to feel. It was a burden he bore with pride, but it also weighed heavily on his conscience. "Everything okay?" Mara asked, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. She stood beside him, her brow furrowed with concern. "Yeah, just thinking," Aegis replied, forcing a smile, "about everything that's happened." "We'll figure it out," she assured him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Together. Aegis appreciated her optimism, but as night fell, he couldn't shake the sense of unease creeping into his mind. He had faced countless enemies, but the Zalathians were different. They were relentless, and their motives remained a mystery. What did they truly want? What had they planned? As they set up camp for the night, Aegis gathered the team around a small fire, the glow illuminating their faces. "We need to talk about our next steps," he said, looking each of them in the eye. "We've won this battle, but the war is far from over." Terk nodded, adjusting his gear. "We need to strike while we have the momentum. If we can take out their command structure, we might force a full retreat." "That's a solid plan," Dr. Voss added. "But we need intel first. Those officers we captured might hold the key to understanding their operations." "Let's get to it," Aegis said, determination hardening his resolve. "We'll interrogate them first thing in the morning." The night stretched on, filled with the sounds of distant conflict and the crackle of the fire. Aegis found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with possibilities and uncertainties. He moved away from the camp, seeking solitude. As he walked through the stillness of the battlefield, he couldn't help but reflect on his past. The training, the experiments, the isolation, it all felt like a dream, a distant memory he could barely grasp. But it was real, and it shaped who he was. A flicker of movement caught his attention, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned, instinctively reaching for his weapon. But it was only a shadow, a young soldier, barely out of his teens, sitting alone on a fallen piece of debris. "Hey," Aegis said softly, not wanting to startle the kid. "You all right?" The soldier looked up, eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. I don't know. This is all so much," he stammered. "I've never seen anything like it." Aegis felt a pang of empathy. He remembered his own early days, the chaos and uncertainty. "It's tough, but we're in this together. You're not alone." "Thank you," the soldier replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to help. I didn't think it would be like this." Aegis crouched beside him, searching for the right words. "None of us knew what to expect. But every person here is making a difference. We fight for our homes, our families. That's what gives us strength." The soldier nodded, a flicker of resolve igniting in his eyes. "I want to be strong like you." Aegis felt a warmth in his chest. "You're already strong. Just remember that courage comes in many forms. It's not always about fighting. Sometimes it's about standing up for what you believe in." With a newfound sense of purpose, the young soldier stood up. "I'll do my best. I won't let you down." "None of us will," Aegis said, a smile breaking through his seriousness. He watched as the soldier returned to the camp, the weight on his shoulders visibly lighter. But as he turned to head back himself, a familiar sense of dread washed over him. The Zalathians were not just soldiers, they were a formidable empire, and Aegis knew they would not stay down for long. He felt the shadows of his past creeping back, the memories of the experimentation and manipulation that had forged him into a weapon. What if he had become just another tool for destruction, one that could be turned against those he cared about? The thoughts spiraled in his mind, but he shook them off as he rejoined his team. They were strong, and together they could face whatever came next. The following morning, they gathered around the captured Zalathian officers, their faces grim and defiant. Aegis felt a flicker of anger at their arrogance. They had lost a battle, but their pride remained intact. "Listen up," Aegis said, stepping forward. "You've been captured, and I suggest you cooperate if you want to see the sun rise again. We're looking for information on your operations. What are your plans?" The lead officer scoffed, a sneer curling his lips. "You think you can intimidate us? You're merely a human. We are the Zalathian Empire." Dr. Voss stepped forward, her voice steady. "And you're outnumbered and outmatched. The sooner you cooperate, the better it will be for you." Aegis felt the tension in the air. The officer's bravado was fading, and he pressed forward. "What do you have planned? We know you were about to launch something big. What was it?" The officer hesitated, glancing at his comrades. Aegis seized the moment. "You think we won't go to any lengths to get the truth? We have ways of making you talk." Finally, the officer seemed to break, his defiance crumbling. "We were planning to launch a new weapon, a device that could disrupt your entire communication system. leaving you vulnerable to our forces. Aegis felt his heart race. When? Where? It was to be deployed from our main base, the officer stammered, the fear creeping into his eyes. But now it will never happen. Aegis exchanged a glance with Dr. Voss, who seemed to be processing the information. We need to secure that base before they can activate the weapon. Can you give us the location? The officer nodded, the weight of realization settling in. Yes, but there are defenses, heavy ones. Don't worry about that, Aegis replied, determination surging within him. We'll handle it. You've given us what we need. Now it's time for us to finish this. As they prepared to mobilize, Aegis felt the familiar rush of adrenaline course through him. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. They would dismantle the Zalathian operations and put an end to their plans once and for all. They set out toward the Zalathian main base, the landscape shifting from the remnants of battle to the stark, barren terrain that characterized the enemy's territory. Aegis felt a sense of urgency driving him forward. He wouldn't let the opportunity slip through his fingers. Along the way, they strategized, formulating a plan to breach the heavily fortified base. Dr. Voss outlined the defenses, and Aegis felt a sense of pride in the cohesion of their team. They had come so far, and now they were ready to face their greatest challenge yet. As they approached the base, Aegis could see the towering walls and turrets that loomed above them. It was a fortress, and the Zalathians were prepared for an all-out assault. Stay low and stick to the shadows, Aegis instructed, his voice steady. We'll move in quickly and take out their defenses before they can sound the alarm. Mara and Terk moved into position, their expressions set with determination. They were ready. With a nod, Aegis led the charge, slipping into the shadows as they approached the base. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The fortress loomed ahead, its walls slick with moisture and marked by the scars of previous skirmishes. Aegis crouched behind a cluster of boulders, his heart racing as he surveyed the Zalathian stronghold. Turrets dotted the perimeter, their energy beams sweeping the ground like predatory eyes. Okay, team, he whispered, glancing at Mara and Terk. We'll split into two groups. Mara, you and Terk will take the west flank. I'll go in from the east. We'll disable the main power source together. Any questions? Mara nodded, her expression fierce. Just keep your head down. We don't want to alert them until we're ready to strike. Understood, Terk added, double-checking his gear. Let's do this. Remember the plan, Aegis said, his voice low but filled with conviction. We move swiftly and decisively. They may outnumber us, but we have the element of surprise. With a final nod of determination, they split, each group taking its position. Aegis could feel the familiar thrill of anticipation coursing through him. This was what he was made for, a super soldier forged in the fires of conflict. He crept through the underbrush, keeping low and silent. The fortress was eerily quiet, the sounds of distant machinery humming softly in the background. Aegis approached the eastern wall, where a small access door was slightly ajar. He slipped through, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Aegis moved carefully, avoiding the patrols that roamed the corridors. He could see the glowing lights of control panels and the shadows of Zalathian guards flitting past. He knew he had to reach the main power source before they realized he was there. As he navigated the dimly lit hallways, Aegis felt a rush of nostalgia. The sterile environments reminded him of the labs where he had undergone his transformation, where he had been stripped of his humanity and rebuilt as a weapon. It was a painful memory, but it fueled his resolve. He wouldn't let others suffer the same fate. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a commotion down the hall. Aegis pressed himself against the wall, straining to listen. "Where is he?" a guard shouted. "He should have reported back by now." "Maybe he's been compromised," another replied. "We need to increase security. The human could be inside." Aegis felt a jolt of adrenaline. He had to move fast. With a determined breath, he darted down the corridor, quickly bypassing a security checkpoint. He reached the central power room, its door sealed tight. He pulled out a small device from his belt, a compact EMP generator. It would temporarily disable the security systems, allowing him to get inside. With a swift motion, he activated it, feeling the hum of energy as the device pulsed to life. The door hissed open, revealing a room filled with blinking lights and humming machinery. Aegis stepped inside, taking in the layout. In the center stood the main power core, a massive orb pulsing with energy. "Okay, time to shut you down," Aegis muttered to himself as he approached the core. He could feel the heat radiating from it, a powerful force that, if harnessed, could fuel the Zalathians' war efforts for ages. Aegis quickly set to work, analyzing the systems. He needed to disable the core without triggering an alarm. Just as he began to hack into the control panel, a voice interrupted him. "What do you think you're doing, human?" Aegis spun around, finding himself face to face with a tall Zalathian officer, flanked by two guards. Their eyes gleamed with hostility, and Aegis felt his heart sink. "Step away from the core," the officer commanded, raising a weapon. "You're outnumbered." "I don't think so," Aegis said, drawing his sidearm and aiming it at the officer. "You're the ones who should be worried." Without waiting for a response, he fired a shot, striking one of the guards. The other reacted instantly, but Aegis was faster. He dove to the side, rolling behind a console as energy blasts exploded around him. "Secure the area," the officer shouted, trying to rally his men. Aegis could hear the alarms blaring, red lights flashing ominously. He knew he had to move fast. He quickly assessed the room and spotted an emergency override panel. If he could reach it, he could lock down the power core and prevent anyone from activating it. "Stop him," the officer yelled, but Aegis was already on the move. He sprinted toward the panel, dodging energy blasts as he went. He could hear the guards scrambling behind him, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. With a leap, Aegis reached the panel, slamming his hand against the controls. He felt the surge of energy as the lockdown sequence activated, sealing the power core behind heavy reinforced doors. "Gotcha," he whispered, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. But there was no time to celebrate. He turned, ready to face the Zalathian officer, who was now furious. "You think you can just waltz in here and take our power?" the officer shouted, fury radiating from him. "You're mistaken." Aegis gritted his teeth, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "I'm just getting started." The officer charged, and Aegis met him head-on. They clashed in a brutal melee, each fighter leveraging their strengths. Aegis ducked under a punch, countering with a swift kick to the officer's midsection. The Zalathian staggered back, but quickly regained his footing. "Impressive," the officer hissed, wiping blood from his mouth. "But you'll need more than brute strength to defeat me." Aegis felt a surge of anger. He had seen too many lives lost to the Zalathian cause. "I don't need brute strength. I have something you'll never understand, resolve." With that, he lunged forward, striking with precision. The officer stumbled, and Aegis seized the opportunity, disarming him in a swift movement. He twisted the officer's arm behind his back, forcing him to the ground. "Tell me where I can find your command center," Aegis demanded, leaning in. "Or this will get a lot worse for you." "Never," the officer spat, but Aegis could see the fear flickering in his eyes. "Last chance," Aegis warned, tightening his grip. "Fine." The officer finally relented, gasping. "It's located in the western sector, near the main hangars. But you won't make it there alive." Aegis felt a sense of satisfaction. "We'll see about that." He released the officer, who scrambled to his feet, his expression a mix of rage and fear. "You'll pay for this, human. The Zalathians will not be defeated by your kind." Aegis didn't respond. Instead, he turned and sprinted toward the exit, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He could hear the sound of footsteps behind him, guards rushing to reinforce their fallen officer. As he emerged from the power room, he activated his communicator. "Mara, Terk, do you read me? I've secured the power core. I'm heading to the command center now. Aegis, we're engaged in heavy fighting, Mara replied, her voice crackling with urgency. We need backup. On my way. Just hold your position, Aegis urged, picking up speed as he navigated the hallways. He could hear the commotion of battle echoing throughout the fortress. The Zalathians were rallying, and Aegis knew time was of the essence. He turned a corner, finding himself in a long corridor leading to the western sector. The lights flickered, and he could see shadows moving ahead. Aegis drew his weapon, moving cautiously. Suddenly, a group of Zalathian soldiers appeared, blocking his path. Their eyes narrowed as they spotted him, and Aegis felt the familiar surge of adrenaline kick in. Get him, one of them shouted, raising his weapon. Aegis sprang into action, dodging the first blast and returning fire. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to outmaneuver the guards, and he quickly dispatched 2 of them before the others could react. Fall back, we need backup, another guard yelled, panic in his voice. But Aegis was relentless. He pushed forward, determined to reach his team. As he navigated the corridor, he could hear the sounds of conflict growing louder. The Zalathians were regrouping, and he needed to reach Mara and Terk before it was too late. Come on, he muttered to himself, sprinting toward the sounds of battle. He turned another corner and burst into a larger chamber filled with Zalathian soldiers. They were engaged in fierce combat with Mara and Terk. Mara, Terk, he shouted, charging into the fray. With renewed energy, he dove into the fight, targeting the nearest Zalathians. His movements were a blur, a deadly dance as he utilized every ounce of his training. The Zalathians were caught off guard by his sudden appearance, and Aegis seized the advantage. Glad you could join us, Terk shouted, taking down an enemy with a swift kick. Aegis felt a surge of determination as he fought alongside Mara and Terk, their movements synchronized as they dispatched Zalathian soldiers with lethal efficiency. The chaos of battle surrounded them, blaster fire illuminating the dim chamber and smoke billowing from the remnants of the ongoing conflict. Let's push through, Aegis shouted, his voice cutting through the din. We need to reach their command center before they regroup. Mara nodded, her eyes fierce with determination. Right behind you, she kicked a soldier aside, grabbing his weapon mid-fall and turning it on another enemy. Terk swung a heavy metal pipe, knocking 2 guards to the ground. We've got this, just keep moving. Aegis led the charge, his mind focused on the objective. They had come too far to turn back now. As they fought their way through the chamber, Aegis spotted a series of doors leading deeper into the fortress. One of them had to lead to the command center. Over there, he yelled, pointing. That way. They sprinted toward the door, their backs to the chaos behind them. Aegis could hear the frustrated shouts of the Zalathians as they began to realize they were losing control of the situation. The door slid open, revealing a long corridor lined with screens displaying various tactical feeds. Aegis felt a rush of urgency. They were getting closer to the heart of the operation. Stay alert, he warned as they stepped inside. We're not safe yet. As they advanced down the corridor, Aegis could hear the chatter of Zalathian officers through the reinforced doors ahead. We need to deploy the reserves. The humans can't breach the command center. Where are the reinforcements? We must hold our ground, another voice barked. Time to put a stop to this, Aegis said, glancing at his teammates. Let's go in hard and fast. They approached the door, and Aegis activated a small explosive charge. Stand back, he warned, planting it on the door's panel. Aegis counted down in his head. 3, 2, 1. The explosion rocked the corridor, sending the door flying inward. Aegis charged through the opening, weapon raised, with Mara and Terk right behind him. The command center was a hive of activity, Zalathian officers scrambling to prepare defenses. Aegis took in the chaos and immediately targeted the nearest officer, firing a precise shot that struck him in the shoulder. Secure the area, one of the officers shouted, raising his weapon. But it was too late. Aegis, Mara, and Terk were already upon them, moving with a fluidity that came from countless hours of training. They fought with a fierce urgency, taking down enemies left and right as they pressed deeper into the heart of the command center. Aegis felt the thrill of battle coursing through him. This was what he had been made for, this moment of chaos, of life and death. But he couldn't lose sight of the goal. They had to find the control room and disable whatever Zalathian weapon they were planning to deploy. "Look for any consoles," Aegis yelled over the noise. "We need to find out what they're up to." He ducked behind a console as a hail of blaster fire erupted in his direction. "Mara, can you cover me?" "On it," she replied, firing back at the approaching guards. Aegis moved quickly, scanning the room for any indicators of what was happening. His heart raced as he spotted a central control panel lit up with holographic displays of the Zalathian operations. "This is it," he shouted, sprinting toward the panel. He could see readings for the weapon systems they had heard about, plans for deployment, and troop movements. "Cover me," he called, sliding into position at the console. He began typing rapidly, accessing the systems and trying to decipher the data before him. "Status report," one of the officers barked, clearly panicked as he saw the humans storming their command center. "We can't let them take control." Aegis focused on the console, his fingers flying over the keys. He could feel the adrenaline surging through him as he hacked into the system. "Come on, come on." Suddenly, he hit a firewall, and the system began to lock him out. A surge of frustration coursed through him. He had to break through. "Hang tight," he yelled, feeling the pressure mounting. He pushed through the barrier, overriding the defenses with everything he had. "Are you in yet?" Mara called out, her voice tense as she fired at an approaching squad of Zalathians. "Almost," Aegis replied, gritting his teeth as he concentrated on the screen. He could see the countdown for the weapon activation, and the numbers were ticking down faster than he had anticipated. He found a weak point in the firewall, exploiting it with a burst of focused energy. The system wavered, and he felt a surge of triumph as he breached the final barrier. "Got it," he shouted, his heart racing. "I'm disabling their weapon systems now." But just as he began the shutdown sequence, a loud explosion rocked the room, sending debris flying. Aegis was thrown to the ground, his vision spinning. "Are you okay?" Tarek's voice reached him, but it felt distant. "I'm fine, just..." Aegis shook his head to clear the fog, scrambling to his feet. He could see chaos erupting around him, guards rushing in from all sides. "Get back to the console," Mara shouted, firing into the fray. "We can't lose our chance." Aegis lunged back toward the panel, but the alarms blared louder now, red lights flashing ominously. "I have to finish this," he began typing furiously, desperate to complete the shutdown before it was too late. "Reinforcements are here," a Zalathian officer shouted, his voice filled with panic. "We need to hold them off." The pressure mounted as Aegis worked, sweat beading on his brow. He could see the countdown still ticking down, and every second felt like an eternity. Come on," he urged himself, his fingers dancing across the controls. "You can do this." Suddenly, a shadow loomed over him. A Zalathian officer, armored and imposing, raised his weapon, ready to fire. Aegis turned just in time to see the officer's finger pull the trigger. But before the shot could be fired, Tarek intervened, tackling the officer to the ground. The weapon discharged, sending a bolt of energy arcing across the room. "Finish the shutdown," Tarek yelled, grappling with the officer. Aegis nodded, refocusing on the console. He could see the weapon systems coming online, but he had to override the activation protocol. "Just a little longer," he muttered, his heart pounding. "Watch out," Mara shouted, and Aegis felt the air shift as another guard charged toward him. With a swift kick, he sent the guard sprawling back, but it cost him precious seconds. He glanced at the countdown and felt a wave of panic. "Come on," he shouted, furiously inputting commands. Just as he hit the final key, the console flashed red. "Activation sequence aborted," it announced, and Aegis felt a wave of relief wash over him. "We did it!" he shouted, barely believing it. "Get out of there," Mara yelled. "We need to regroup before they overwhelm us." "Right," Aegis replied, adrenaline surging once more. He turned to Terk, who was still grappling with the officer. "We need to go now." Terk managed to throw the officer off, but the commotion had drawn more guards to their location. "We've got company," he shouted, scrambling to his feet. Aegis moved to help, firing shots to cover their retreat. The three of them rushed back toward the exit, dodging blaster fire as they went. "Keep moving," Aegis urged, his heart racing. They were close to the door, but the Zalathians were regrouping, pouring into the command center to cut them off. "Mara, go!" Terk shouted, shoving her toward the exit. "No way, we stick together," she replied, firing back at the advancing soldiers. Aegis felt the urgency building within him. "We can't hold this position, we need to break out now." With a nod, Mara took the lead, bursting through the door. They sprinted down the corridor, Aegis covering their retreat as they fled the command center. The alarms blared louder than ever, and Aegis felt the weight of the moment crashing down around them. They had to escape before the Zalathians could mount a counterattack. "Head for the east exit," he shouted, his eyes scanning for any signs of an opening. They dashed down the corridor, blaster fire echoing behind them. Aegis could feel the heat of the battle on his back, but he pushed forward, determined to reach safety. As they rounded a corner, they spotted the east exit ahead, a glimmer of hope in the chaos. "Almost there," Terk called, pushing himself harder. Suddenly, a squad of Zalathian soldiers appeared ahead, blocking their path. As Aegis, Mara, and Terk burst through the east exit, they skidded to a halt, hearts pounding, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. The night sky was painted with the flames of the burning fortress behind them, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding landscape. "We made it!" Terk exclaimed, a mix of disbelief and relief flooding his voice. Aegis took a moment to catch his breath, looking back at the chaos they had left behind. The Zalathians were scrambling, their command center in disarray, unable to comprehend the swift defeat that had just unfolded. "Not yet," Aegis said, his mind racing. "We need to regroup with the others. They'll be coming for us." Mara nodded, scanning the horizon. "The extraction point is just a few clicks to the north. We can't linger." They set off, moving quickly through the underbrush, the sound of distant alarms fading behind them. Aegis felt a mix of triumph and sorrow. They had accomplished a monumental task, but the fight was far from over. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the landscape, symbolizing a new beginning. They reached the extraction point, where a small team awaited them. The familiar sight of their allies filled Aegis with hope. "We thought we lost you," one of the soldiers shouted, rushing forward. "Not a chance," Aegis replied, a grin breaking through his fatigue. "We've got a lot to share." As they boarded the extraction ship, Aegis felt a sense of camaraderie surrounding him. They had faced the darkness together, emerging stronger on the other side. "Do you think we've really done it?" Mara asked, looking at Aegis with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Aegis turned to her, his expression resolute. "We've dealt a significant blow to the Zalathians, but there's still work to do. We've ignited the spark of resistance, and we need to keep it burning." The ship's engines roared to life, lifting them away from the battlefield. As they soared into the sky, Aegis looked down at the fortress, now a smoldering ruin. It was a reminder of their struggle, of the sacrifices made for freedom. "We'll gather our forces, strategize, and take the fight to them," Aegis declared, his voice filled with determination. "This is just the beginning." Mara and Terk exchanged glances, their expressions mirroring Aegis's resolve. They were a team forged in conflict, bound by a shared mission and an unwavering spirit. As they soared into the dawn, Aegis felt a new sense of purpose. They were no longer just soldiers. They were champions of hope, standing against tyranny. The fight for their future had only just begun. And as long as they stood together, they knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead.